Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the RDH Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Chad. Joined alongside me is my brother, Tanner. How's it hanging, dude?
Chad, it's
Bad
it's not
is
we're
the
not
answer.
we're not doing too
Bad.
hot. If you watched this weekend, it wasn't pretty, especially for my teams and specifically only my teams. So it was a pretty bad weekend, but it was good. We had MLK Day. It was a nice long weekend, so I got to recover. I got to sit back and enjoy some good football, some bad football, and now starting to be a lot more basketball. So I'm excited for that. Spurs still suck, but they're getting better, right? And that's the only thing that's important. Um, yeah, what's been new with you, Chad? Because besides the Cowboys loss, I feel like you've I don't know, had some stuff going on.
I have. I've had some stuff going on. This is kind of the time we're about 3 weeks away from the transition period of the podcast, which I'm really excited about. That's when we go to college football, and Tanner really takes over the NBA. We still obviously talk NFL. We hit all of the off-season news and trades and acquisitions and everything. We never stop the NFL, but it kind of gets put in the background. Whenever we really start getting into these NCAA football prospects that are coming into the draft, that's my favorite. And hey, like you said, you're the basketball insider. I wish I knew basketball. I really am not that good at basketball. Very first time I played basketball, I got dunked on. Thanks, Logan Webb, good buddy of mine. In my in my wedding party. But everything's going good here, man. Doing a lot of surfing. I got some compression boots now. That was my little gift to myself, so that was nice. But working through some injuries over here, and continuing to be a couch warrior watching some football. But we're gonna jump into it. Usually we talk about NFL. We just kind of hit on it. This is RDH Sports Podcast. If you haven't heard of us before, a ton of NFL talk, a ton of college football talk, and other sports sprinkled in. Instagram, RDH.sports. Same thing with Twitter, YouTube, RDH Sports. Give us a follow, subscribe, like we said last episode, we got over 70,000 views and a ton of new subscribers this year. So thank you everyone again for that. And college football talks usually our first segment, but we're going to jump into that really right before the Super Bowl. And we're going to hit the ground running on a ton of these NCAA prospects that are entering the NFL draft. And I'm going to be creating multiple draft profiles for each of these guys. And then, if you follow us on Instagram at rd8.sports, like I said, and our website, rdhsports.net, I have a full breakdown of each of these prospects that I actually publish online and everything. So this year, we're going to kind of put it on Instagram, make it a little bit easier to read. And then if you want to look at the full breakdown of each of these prospects, it's going to be on rdhsports.net. But jumping to the wild card recap, Tanner said it. We were down bad. And we're going to start with Tanner's team, Tanner's number 2 team. Browns versus Texans. We both picked the Browns to win because honestly, I thought this defense was going to actually play, and they didn't. Texans destroyed the Browns 45-14. Really wasn't even a game at all. Tell me what you saw in that one, Tanner. What went wrong? What went right for the Texans? And what do we need to expect from the Cleveland Browns going forward?
I mean, what to expect? We'll get into that at a later point because honestly, I have no idea right now. This team has been so up and down during this season, but I just want to give, like a shout out to this team just for being able to, make it through all the injuries, make it through all these hardships and actually make a fun season out of it because, you saw Nick Chubb go down, you saw Deshaun Watson go down, and, as a Cleveland fan, you're like, season's over. You just paid this guy $250 million. Nick Chubb is the best player on your roster besides Myles Garrett, and they're gone. They're out for the season. So the fact that they actually made the playoffs and they were competitive, and had people excited for this matchup is, I think, just all in itself like a big silver lining because realistically they probably shouldn't have even been in that position, given the quarterback play that they've seen throughout the season. But that being said, the defense I think just didn't really do a whole lot just in general at all. I think that's one of the more units we've been talking about this season. One of the best. It's a historical defense, and they didn't play like it. They really didn't play like it. I mean, you have players that you were just looking at, like, I mean, naming a couple names like Greg Newsome, he didn't play that great of a game. Denzel Ward wasn't targeted that much, and that was probably a big part of the game plan. Grant Delpit was out of this game, and the replacement safety, he didn't do a very good job. I know I was screaming at you when we were on the call watching that game together, and I was just screaming my mind off because no one could tackle. It just didn't look like the defense came ready to play, and I just really think the luck, the magic kind of ran out, for Joe Flacco and the old Cleveland Browns because, like I said, they've been dealing with a lot this season, and it's hard to play at such a high level when you have so many injuries, and so many things that happen to you. So I think the luck ran out. I think Cleveland, they played well. They didn't play poorly, but I just think Houston was more ready for that game. They're at home. CJ Stroud kind of has a chip on his shoulder. He didn't play in the last matchup, and the entire sports media was saying how the Browns were going to destroy him. So it really didn't give the Browns like a chip or anything like that. If anything, the Texans were kind of the underdogs, I think. I want to say the Browns were favored in that game. So Texans took that and they ran with it, and CJ Stroud is an absolute monster, and you know why now. So I think, too, it's just a lot of that could have been avoided, given like CJ's not playing, but like, I mean, CJ, you saw how many big throws he made in that game. He missed like maybe one, and it's like that's a future franchise quarterback right there. And Cleveland got beat. I'm not really sad about it because like I kind of expected it almost. I gotta ride them a little bit because they were playing well up until that point, but Texans are a really good team. They're a really, really good team. We'll get more into it later, but they played really well in that matchup. Nico Collins is going to be absolutely disgusting when Tank Dell comes back next year, and that offense is going to be insane. I think you saw the offensive rookie of the year, offensive or defensive rookie of the year going at it. Will Anderson, he made an impact in that game too. It's not like he didn't. He's destroying the Browns' beat up offensive line, and he's making an impact. So this team, speaking about the Texans, they're really good, and they had one of the shortest rebuilds I think I've ever seen. And you got to give a lot of credit to that football team. But what D'Amico Ryans is doing over there, he is just turned that franchise around completely in the blink of an eye.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't have said it better myself. To hit on the numbers. I mean, Joe Flacco did throw for over 300 yards, right? He had a touchdown and 2 interceptions. He took 4 sacks as well. The Cleveland offensive line did not look good.
No.
Starting on Cleveland side, then I'll jump over to Houston. But Cleveland, what I really saw was a team that just kind of got unlucky. And we say it in hockey, not all the bounces, the bouncing pucks. Sometimes they just don't go your way. And it kind of looked like none of the bounces was going Cleveland's way. So not only did you have wide open wide receivers down the field in Houston, CJ Stroud was not missing a pass.
Mm-mm.
And like you said, he did an interview on the Pat McAfee show where you talked about it last week, and all he said was, "Oh, that's what they said about me. All right, like, all right, bet." You know what I mean? Like, that's a true competitor
Mm-hmm.
and someone that doesn't get flustered at all on one of the biggest show or like podcasts in the United States right now is first of all pretty crazy to me. The fact that he didn't even have like a, you know what I mean, one of those. I mean, he was just cool, calm, collected, and went out and did exactly what he said he was going to do,
Mm-hmm.
which was beat the Browns. And you're right. The Browns were favored in that game. I think that the Cleveland Browns defense, if they would have showed up, that would have been a really good football game because the Texans defense showed up, like you said, but
Mm-hmm.
Cleveland did not at all. Myles Garrett looked non-existent. The defensive tackles looked non-existent. The linebackers, Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, usually flies around the field, looks slow, right? You said it. Newsome looks slow. I mean, the whole Browns team just looked really slow and sluggish. And the fact that they didn't even really put up a competition at all,
Mm-hmm.
it's one of those things where you can't really do it. Now, the Texans being at home definitely gave them a huge advantage, right? They
Oh,
were
huge.
inside, they were at home, they were at Houston. That place is rocking whenever it comes to playoffs. Houston fans do not mess around when it comes to the playoffs. Um, Jumping over to the Texans. CJ Stroud had the best game a rookie has ever had in the first round in the wild card round of the playoffs. He was 17 or 16 for 21 for 274 yards, 3 touchdowns. As a rookie against the number 1 and or number 2 defense, not in the AFC, in the NFL.
He
So
destroyed him.
it destroyed him. I mean, it grated cheese. It was horrible. The Browns defense looked horrendous that game. And the biggest takeaway I had from that game is Cleveland has a lot of pieces on defense. They're all pretty young. Has a lot of pieces on offense. Not pretty young, but not necessarily out of the prime of their career yet either.
Mhm.
And once Deshaun Watson comes back, what happens? Because Deshaun Watson in Cleveland has not looked good when he's been playing for Cleveland. He's not looked good as a starter. He's had maybe 1, 2 games that you could consider good,
Yeah.
right? You've already seen Sean Payton in Denver say, look, this Russell Wilson experiment is not working. He's gone next season. He's not going to be here. What's going to happen with Cleveland? How many more years does Deshaun Watson have to prove to this organization that he's worth that contract? In my opinion, this year. Because you not only had somebody that came off the street, homie was old. No offense, Joe Flacco. No offense. Nobody saw that coming. And the fact that he threw over 300 yards every single game he played, it shows you that it's a quarterback problem. It's
Mhm.
not a team problem. It's a quarterback problem, right? You have pieces on the offense. Nick Chubb, like you said, he hasn't been here. Still threw 300 yards, Joe Flacco did, right? Amari Cooper is a true number 1 wide receiver. He was not 100% this whole season. He was banged up.
Mhm.
And Joe Flacco still delivered. And Amari Cooper, even banged up, had over 200 yards receiving at the end of that season in 1 game,
Yeah.
right? So I think I think Cleveland, the future is extremely bright.
Oh,
I think it's
100%.
very promising to be playing for that organization. Here's the caveat to that. You're in probably one of the hardest divisions in football because the Steelers are not going anywhere.
Nope.
I understand that Tomlin walked off of the podium whenever they were talking to him about his contract. Look,
That was funny.
I wish more coaches and more players could walk off and not get fined because some of these questions, are just so stupid. You know what I mean? Some of these questions are just so dumb. He just lost a game in the playoffs. Don't ask him about his freaking contract.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? To me, some of those reporters' questions are just so stupid anyway. But last thing I'll say about it, Cleveland, you're a quarterback away from not only being a playoff team, but being a divisional conference championship round team every single year, or it's a failure of a season, right? You're going to have to compete with Baltimore in that division for however long Lamar Jackson is there,
Mhm.
but you should be right there at number 2, right? So we'll see what happens. I don't think the Browns are going to go through a ton of changes within their organization. I do think that the Browns will add a couple key pieces in the offseason. And I also think that they'll add some really good draft picks as well because the Browns draft really well.
They
They're one
do.
of the best teams in the AFC drafting, and not only the AFC, in the NFL at drafting. Long-winded answer for the Cleveland Browns.
No,
I'll pause there. Do you have anything to add to that?
I think you make a really good point too, and I think it's just one of those things, Cleveland has been dealing with for the past, what almost feels like 30 years, 40 years. It's just they've been a quarterback away for as long as I can remember, as long as I've been alive. I think Baker was the closest answer to that, and he showed a lot of promise, and they got rid of him, and there's a whole list of reasons because of that, right? But it's just one of those things. I think you go out and you spend big in free agency, and that's what Cleveland has been doing. Like you said, they've been drafting well, and I think they've been really good in free agency. They go out and they get Deshaun Watson, and he just didn't deliver, and it's just that was kind of like, what are we supposed to do, as a franchise? Like we got one of the biggest quarterback prospects, on the open market. Like what are we supposed to do? You saw the Rams do it with Matthew Stafford, and they won a Super Bowl with him, and when Tampa Bay did it with Tom Brady, and they won a Super Bowl. It's just one of those things where like, okay, we're gonna bring in someone who's proven to be one of the best players, at that position before and in a season, and then it just didn't deliver. False promises when it comes to that. But I agree. Deshaun Watson, I think he has another season, and I think just given the nature of the contract of the situation, you have to let him play. You can't let anyone step in front of him, and you just got to go out there and see what he can do. These past 2 seasons, he hasn't played a full season. That's step number 1. Get out there, play a full season, and let's see what the heck you actually got. Because honestly, I don't think a lot of people know right now. because, there was that year he wasn't playing football, doing with all the legal stuff, then he comes back, gets that suspension, and during that season, then, the excuses are, oh, he hasn't really played in that long. He doesn't, he's not at game speed yet. It's going to take him a while to ramp up. This season is a wash anyways. And then comes this season, it's like, okay, he's back at game speed. He's at a full training camp. What can he do? And then, the Nick Chubb stuff and all the injuries on other starts happening. So I think we just, hopefully, obviously the league's not perfect. Injuries happen, and things of that nature happen. But like, if you give, hopefully, this man a good roster, which they have, and more key pieces on offense and on defense, I really do think that it could be a contending Super Bowl team. I mean, just look at it on paper. It's one of the most disgusting teams I've ever seen. But it's just that quarterback position, man. And, until they get that right, they're not going to do anything, which is the sad truth about it. But, enough of me rambling about that. We'll see what happens in the offseason, in the coming weeks. But I think, just a big round of applause to that coaching staff too. I think Stefanski is absolutely the right fit. I think he stays. I think they continue to work out of his system. I think, I bashed it a little bit throughout the season, but when it works, it works. You saw that Joe Flacco, like Amari Cooper said, poetry in motion. So big praise from Amari Cooper means big praise from me. So I love what Joe Flacco did. Hopefully they can keep him as a backup or something just in case, but realistically that's probably not going to happen. But it was fun. It was definitely fun. Let's move on to the Dolphins and Chiefs, which I don't know if anyone expected the Dolphins to win this game.
No, like you said, the Dolphins took on the Chiefs and the Chiefs won 26-7. The weather wasn't the best weather. Kansas City weather was so cold, just like the Buffalo game, but the Buffalo game was to the extreme. They had to move that one to Monday. But yeah, I mean, the Kansas City Chiefs dominated 26-7, like we said. To be honest, my takeaways of the game: if you're the Miami Dolphins and you're only scoring 7 points, and one of them was a Tyreek Hill touchdown that was a missed tackle, they really shouldn't have happened anyway. It's not a good game, right? And this is the story of the Miami Dolphins of late, right? They are a very good team in the regular season, and then let me rephrase that. They're a very good team up until the last couple weeks of the regular season and the beginning of playoffs. For some reason, they just kind of disappear. Their offense kind of goes away. And the reason I think that is one, you have an entire season to kind of figure out what this team is doing. I think Mike McDaniels early in the season, reminds me of the old Arizona Cardinals when they started 8-0 and then they went 0-8. Obviously, they're not that bad. But, in the beginning of the season, Kingsbury had those guys moving for Arizona, right? He had them moving. And same thing with Mike McDaniels. And then toward the end of the season, whether it be injuries, whether it be just playing, division opponents for the second time, sometimes the end of your schedule gets a little bit tougher. Toward the beginning, you have kind of spurts within your schedule of really hard and really easy games. So there's a bunch of different factors to it. But when you're the Miami Dolphins, can they not play in cold weather? Because, I was watching this game and I'm sitting there and I'm like, you brought it up last podcast. And you said, this weather is going to be so cold. And that's why that's why you took Kansas City. And that's the same reason I did. As soon as you said that, I'm like, oh, it's Miami in cold weather. I'm going to absolutely take Kansas City. And Kansas City didn't dominate. That's the thing. I know the score was 26-7, but that was an easily winnable game if you were Miami. If Miami just scored, or if Miami just got points whenever they went down the field when Kansas City did, it would have been a way closer game. And, last thing I'll say about it, and then I'll throw it over to you. It's just disappointing. If you're a Dolphins fan, it's disappointing. Now, you're playing payoff Pat. So that's, good luck regardless. But the Chiefs had the most drop passes in the league this year. The Chiefs, if it was any year to beat the Chiefs, it was this year. And this was the Dolphins' year to do it. And they didn't do it. And, they would have had a tough matchup the next week, because that's when you're getting into the, the divisional round. But still, the Dolphins not only came up short, but almost didn't really show up, other than the Tyreek Hill touchdown that they had once again off of a missed tackle. What did you think about that game? Did you think that it was the cold weather? Did you think it was the play calling? What'd you think?
I don't think it's the play calling. Like, I really like Mike McDaniel, and I think, I've expressed on this podcast how much I like him. It's just the roster that he's put together. And I don't want to make excuses for this team, but they did have a lot of injuries in the back half of the season. You have to factor that into. They lost.
specifically on their defense.
Their defense just was absolutely torn apart. It's a good defense. It really is when they're all playing, and they were playing, second men and, third string players. And it's hard to win, especially when you're going up against Patrick Mahomes. But, teams throughout the season have found a way to do it. And it's just one of those things, you raise the question, like, Tua's kind of always played in the South, and now he's playing, in these cold weather games. He went to school, Alabama, now he's in Miami. He doesn't really know cold unless it's in the division playing against division opponents. And he lost that Buffalo game. He lost that game at the end of the season. I think if they won that game, this would be so much different. Instead they'd be playing Pittsburgh at home, and it's like they'd play so much better at home, but it's just you didn't win the division, and I think that was kind of like their last hope almost. And I saw a stat going into that game. It was like Tua is like 0-4 in like cold weather games, like when the starting temperature at kickoff is like freezing or below. He doesn't win. It's just he doesn't play that well, and it's just one of those things. It's funny because earlier in the season we were talking about Tua with the MVP conversation. We were, and Tyreek was in there too, and he has had one of his best seasons to date. But they're just early success, like you said with the Arizona Cardinals a couple seasons ago. It does not translate to playoff success. You have to be hot at the right time, which. Go look at Dallas, go look at that game, go look at Houston. Like, it's just, we're going to talk about Dallas and we talked about Houston, but it's just, it really, really is just, how do you play in January? And those cold weather teams, the Buffaloes, even though Pittsburgh lost, but historically Pittsburgh, Chicago's and like the Green Bays and stuff like that, they win in the playoffs because people can't play in the cold, and it's just, it is an advantage in the playoffs. Absolutely. And Miami couldn't play in it. Buffalo could, and in the season closer, and so did KC. They've been there. They've done this more than a couple times, and this was almost routine for them, I felt like. But as to what the problem is, I don't really know, because I think that roster is absolutely stacked. I think if you're that coaching staff, if you're those owners, those GMs, I think you just keep it together, add other key pieces, veterans in there, and just keep it together, because it's a good team. It's a really good football team, and Mike McDaniel again assembled it in a very short time. So I think they're built to last. I'll say that. How they will do in the future, I don't know, but I think it's worth a couple more shots at it, because the more familiar you're going to get with the system, the better and better you're going to be. So I think Tua is, hopefully, he's still developing as a quarterback in this system, but I don't know, man. I like the team a lot still. I think that they just kind of had a bad end to the season, and they got kind of unlucky with these cold weather games. But like I said, if they won the division, it would have been a lot different story. We would be kind of saying like, oh, they're really good right now, assuming they beat the Steelers. But I don't know, man. I don't think they're as bad of a team as people were saying. I like Tua. I like Tyreek on that roster. Obviously, I love Raheem Mostert and Devon Achane and all those guys over there, but it's a bright future too, I'll say, for the Dolphins.
And you kind of nailed it, right? They have a lot of really good players already. You named a couple of them, being Tyreek Hill. Early season, Tua is really good. Late season Tua, not necessarily so much. I feel like every year he starts off in the MVP conversation, and then he kind of just falls off. The hard part is for me is to evaluate the quarterback position at the Miami Dolphins, because you have you have so many quarterbacks that are going to be free agents this year. And you have a lot of quarterbacks that are going to be free agents that have playoff experience. Tua does have playoff experience, but at the same time, he's not good in the playoffs historically. And with the roster that he's had, that excuse starts to go away, right? This is the second year he's had Tyreek. This isn't the first. So last year you can make the excuse of, oh, it's a brand new shiny toy wide receiver, Tyreek Hill. I'm used to throwing it to Jalen Waddle, who's pretty much equally as fast. And then they just continue to get better year over year in drafting. So I think they're going to get better through the draft. I also think they're going to sign some free agents. I also think that they had some injuries that plagued them. Yeah. And if they would have won 1 to 2 more games this season, like you said, we wouldn't even be talking about them in this situation right now. And Jalen Ramsey was out for a ton of the season. And when Jalen Ramsey, the cornerback for the Dolphins, came back, the defense played better.
Mhm.
A lot of guys got hurt for this team. Both of their starting defensive ends got hurt. Bradley Chubb got hurt, and also Jalen Phillips, who is showing very good promise, a young prospect out of Miami, if I'm not mistaken, and showing really, really good, projections in the NFL, and then he just goes down, right? I had him in my dynasty fantasy league. That's the only reason I know who he is. Also, I know every college player, but it's to me, it begs the question of when do you move on from Tua? Because there's nowhere else on this roster that you can say is the problem. It's not the running game. It's
No.
not the receiving game. The
Mm-mm.
defense, obviously, but they were hurt, so you can't really blame the defense. Defense can always get better too, right? If you get another great cornerback at the end of the first round where they're at right now, another
I mean,
offensive lineman.
do they have Xavier Howard too? It's Jalen Ramsey and Xavier Howard back there. Like it's pretty locked up. Javon Holland's been playing too at safety, and
There it is.
like it's just these guys are playing really well. I really
Yeah, and
can't see a better team. You know what I mean? That you
that
would.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. So it's like you haven't necessarily maxed out on all of your positions. There's definitely positions that you can get better at, but you've got really good players in a lot of the key positions, right? Being cornerbacks, also your defensive line's kind of nasty.
Mhm.
No one really saw Jalen Phillips coming on that early when they drafted him in the first round. They kind of thought he'd be more of a project player. His first season, he was a project player, and then he really started coming on, and now he's playing really well. Then he gets hurt. Then they trade for Bradley Chubb. The Dolphins are not scared. They have one of the best defensive tackles who was also hurt this season, right? Out of Clemson. So there is so many pieces on this Dolphins team that are coming back next year, right? My only question is what happens with Tua? He's still on contract, but I don't know realistically if you're the ownership of this team and you're going, okay, we're going to get 3-4 players in the draft that may be starting next year that aren't now. Yes, we're going to lose a couple key guys, some older guys. We got some contracts coming up, but this is a young team. And this is from the coaching staff to the players. This is a young football team. And you have key veterans in there. You have Tyreek Hill in there that's sitting there as a wide receiver who's a veteran, and he's sitting there just every day going up against these corners and defensive backs that you just mentioned. And also Jalen Waddle's sitting there learning from him.
Mhm.
Achan is sitting there learning from Raheem Mostert and Jeff Wilson. I understand that that's maybe not the best two guys to learn from, if you other NFL fans, but that's a pretty solid 1 and 2. And if that's where you're coming into and that's where you're learning from, it's great. So my only thing for the Dolphins is does do they take a chance on Russell Wilson? Chicago's going to be shopping Justin Fields. Do they take a chance on Justin Fields? I think they need to get a quarterback if they decide to do this. They need to get a quarterback with playoff experience. And we said it earlier, a quarterback that can play in the cold. We're not trying to bash on Tua here, but we haven't seen
No,
him win in the cold yet,
no,
right?
he
We have
doesn't.
not seen him win in the cold yet. And even in college football, it was a little bit of the same story when he played in the cold. We won't go all the way back there, but still, that's my biggest question about this Miami Dolphins team. And I think a lot of experts and analysts are kind of thinking the same thing. So we'll see what happens.
Mhm.
But like Tanner said, bright future for Miami. And sorry, you always have to run into playoff Pat. You know what I mean? They always have to run into playoff Pat or Josh Allen at the very end of the season. And like you said, they had
Mhm.
the game won. They really did had the game. They had the game won in Miami and Buffalo. They just did not execute at the end of the game, and they lost.
Yeah,
Right.
it
So
stinks.
yeah. So the AFC's not the AFC is absolutely loaded with quarterbacks. Guess what? Joe Burrow was hurt this year. Guess what? Justin Herbert and the Chargers had an off year. That's
Yeah,
not going to continue to happen.
but like
Right.
who's going to come in? I would say that who's going to come in, like you said, with playoff experience is going to be better than Tua in that system. They're going to have to learn it, right? I don't think it's going to be Justin Fields. No offense, Justin. I don't think it's going to be like who else is on the block.
I mean, you have Russell Wilson, but
But
you also don't really know right now who's on the block, right? Because nobody
it's
starts
true.
cutting guys until after the playoffs are done. Right now, it's January. You know what I mean? And that's why you listen to us, right? Our wheels are already going about this offseason stuff, and we're going to get you the stuff before it actually happens. But there's a lot of guys that are going to be available. I'm not saying that that's my thing, right? That's why last week, or not last week, whenever we were talking about the Cowboys, we're not going to get into exactly what I said, but talking about a team that is a quarterback away, Cleveland is a quarterback away, right?
Hmm.
You are not replacing the current quarterback that they have until you find someone better.
True.
And that's exactly what you're saying with Tua. Justin Fields does not walk in and give the Miami Dolphins a better chance to win than Tua does. Sorry, I don't think he does. You need a quarterback. It's pretty simple, the type of quarterback you need in Miami, not a read option. You don't need to be able to run. You need to be a pocket passer, and you also need to be able to hit the deep ball. Well, there's some pretty good college quarterbacks that are coming out right now that are pretty good deep ball passers, but they're going to be taken in the top 5. And
Mm-hmm.
Miami's not picking in the top 5. You have you had, I don't know what happened when he went to Denver, but you had one of the best deep ball passers in NFL history with Russell Wilson, who is clearly going to be looking for a job and also going to have a massive pay cut. Now you're not paying Tua right now. So you may have to, get that expense. And that's if you want to go the Russell Wilson way. And that could be another blow up experiment in your face, because if you get rid of Tua and Russ doesn't work out, then you're sitting there going, well, what the heck did we do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. But here's the last thing I'll say with the Dolphins, because we've been talking about him at length. Tua's contract. When Tua's contract is up, if he does not have multiple playoff wins, he's gone. It's just that simple. He's going to be gone, because you cannot say that this is the roster. If CJ Stroud were to have come out and lost every single game this season after Tank Dell, even with Tank Dell, no disrespect, Tank Dell, even with Tank Dell in there, you can say, no, that's okay. Okay. He didn't have anybody to throw to. Trevor Lawrence, his first year when he had Urban Meyer
Yeah.
as his coach, nobody to throw to, right? His best wide receiver was Zay Jones. Okay. Like, when you don't have these wide receivers and you have these quarterbacks that are still playing at an elite level and still winning games, it becomes a non-excuse for other teams, right? Because CJ Stroud was drafted last year. CJ Stroud's a rookie, right? That is a rookie quarterback that completely transformed that Texans organization overnight.
Mm-hmm.
Overnight. That doesn't happen a lot. Russell Wilson was that quarterback coming out of Wisconsin, taken in the mid rounds, and just starts going, right? Dynasty begins right there with Pete Carroll and the Legion of Boom. So you're one quarterback away. If the Dolphins had a CJ Stroud, if the Dolphins had a prime Russ, they're in the AFC Championship every single year. Every year. But you got to play Buffalo, you got to play Baltimore, you got to play the Bengals, and you got to play Kansas City every single year, most likely. So what do all 4 of those teams have in common? An elite quarterback. Elite. Dolphins are the one team that doesn't. They lose every year. I don't know. Maybe maybe there's a lot more to it, but that's all about the Dolphins. The Lions and the Rams, a lot closer than a lot of people thought it was going to be. The Lions squeak it out and get their first playoff win in like 30 years, if I'm not mistaken. 24-23. That was the only game that I watched post game, because being a fan, it doesn't help that I'm a fan of the Dallas Cowboys and we just get absolutely destroyed all the time, but hey, we deserve it. You know what I mean? The Lions haven't won a playoff game in 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a die-hard fan base that deserves a playoff win. And it's a working class city, right? It is a working class organization, and they just outgrinded the Rams, and banging up Matthew Stafford a little bit in that game helped, obviously. But the Lions did it. They finally did it. They finally got their first playoff win. Take us through that game, Tanner.
I really, you got to credit Dan Campbell. Like, he got those boys ready to go, and amped for this playoff game. I mean, what a better experience, to win the first playoff game in this building since 1991, when they won against the Dallas Cowboys. And it's just, that's an awesome experience. And these guys were ready for it. And they were not, the lights were not too bright. And you went up against a Super Bowl winning quarterback with a multiple Super Bowl winning coach, and it's just like, he's been there, he's done that. McVay's been to multiple Super Bowls, and Matthew Stafford, he very recently won a Super Bowl, and this team was hot. Like, the Rams were not a bad team. I was saying coming into this, like, they were a hot team, and the Puka Nacua, one of the best rookie receivers we've ever seen, and they've got Kyron Williams too, who they absolutely stopped on the ground. This Lions defense was all over the field, and they were not letting the Rams get as much as they wanted. Obviously the Rams towards the end of that game and in the middle of that game, they started coming back. They started, starting to show what they can do, but it was just field goal after field goal and stuff like that. But when when the time was, come to put the chips on the table, to put it all in, the Lions did that. They leaned on the players. They were leaning on this entire season. Amon-Ra St. Brown had a great game. Jahmyr Gibbs, great game. David Montgomery, great game. Like they were all contributing in many different ways throughout this playoff game. And Jared Goff, everyone wrote him off a couple seasons ago. He's back. He's winning in Detroit. And so you really have to credit the game plan coming into this game, which is Dan Campbell and his entire coaching staff. And you have to credit the players and the execution on what they did, because they did Detroit Lions football. They didn't play to the LA Rams. No, they played at home. They played Detroit Lions football, and they won the way that they wanted to. It's you see too often in the playoffs where teams will just kind of go with the flow and not kind of dictate the pace of a game. But when you can do that, and when you can do it as dominantly as they did in that win, that's how you win football games, specifically in the playoffs. You do what you want to do. Obviously, there's game plan decisions. Things change, but if you can dictate the pace of a game and you can get out to an early lead like they did, it's hard to lose it. I mean, we'll go on to the Cowboys probably, and we'll have some things to say about that and the dictation of the game. But this is how you win a football game. I know it was close, I really do, but this is how you win a football game. The Lions just put out the blueprint. Obviously the Rams are a really good team, but that just shows you that blueprint will still work against good teams in the NFL. So Rams are a really good team, and the Lions are an even better team. I think that this Lions team is going to make it pretty far in these playoffs, because they got a juicy matchup with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers coming up here pretty soon at home again. So it'd be pretty fun to see them, not winning a playoff game for 30 years to suddenly winning 2 at home in an NFC Championship game. But what did you think about this game? I mean, does this not just scream Detroit Lions football?
I mean, you had Dan Campbell after the game saying, to Jared Goff, like you're here.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, you're here. This is your team. You played Detroit Lions football. And me just saying that gets me choked up a little bit, because, how much that coach means to that organization, right? Like, how much that coach means to that organization, how much that organization means to the fans. When was the last time you saw a playoff win in a bunch of grown-ass, burly, scary-looking men just crying in the stands, right? Just crying in the stands for a playoff win. Incredible scene. It makes me wish I would have been there, right? And it makes me wish I would have been a Detroit fan for that moment, because it seems magical. It literally seems magical. It almost reminds me of a team, that won the World Series very recently, that hadn't won the World Series before with the Rangers, but had been so close so many times. Guess what? Detroit was never close. They were never close. They never had that. The Rangers were an out away from winning the World Series, and then they botched it, right? And then in the Lions, you had Barry Sanders.
Yeah.
You're one of the best running backs of all time, and you
some of the greatest players of all time.
Thank you, greatest players of all time, 100%. Didn't have anybody else around him, right? Didn't have anybody else around him. Couldn't get that next step, right? Couldn't get that next step because there was just nobody there. Now you have a coach and an organization that is the only time I've seen it in all of football is Jerry Jones and the Dallas Cowboys. They are and here's why. Dan Campbell is not worried about his job. Not at all. Jerry Jones, he owns the Cowboys. He can't get fired, right? He's not worried about his job. He's going to go in there and do whatever he has to do every year. That's what Dan Campbell does. I feel like Dan Campbell probably helped mop up after the game before to help the custodians. Like, he's just that kind of a guy, right? He does everything from the very bottom minuscule tasks to the very, very tippy top tasks of the game plan and coaching on Sundays and Saturdays and Mondays and Thursdays, right? And just being an embodiment for this whole franchise is, I just can't say enough good things about Dan Campbell. Now, the actual team, you nailed it. When the Rams traded away Jared Goff, or when the Rams traded away Jared Goff, it was like, we won that trade. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because they did. And Matthew Stafford immediately went in and won a Super Bowl, like you said. And you're sitting there going, I don't know if Detroit won that trade. And then you're like, wait, hold on. You looked at last year and you're like, wait, hold on. Okay, they're about a year away.
Mm-hmm.
About a couple years away. And then they have this draft. And here's where I'm bringing it back to where Dan Campbell's exactly like Jerry Jones. He went up and got a linebacker that wasn't supposed to be taken from Wyoming until the second round. He didn't care. That's my guy. I don't care. You know what else he did? He went up and traded for Jahmyr Gibbs. I don't care. You got him in the second round? I don't care. That's my guy. Right? Bijan Robinson, generational talent. They're going, shit, Jahmyr Gibbs is right there. What are you talking about? And you saw how he won the game. Season before, Jameson Williams, one of the fastest players in college football. Got popped for gambling, then got hurt, but he's back. And you see the flashes of it. You have Amon-Ra St. Brown, like you said, that is one of the best wide receivers, top 10 wide receiver, young wide receiver too, top 10, easily, right? Easily. He's going to be there for the next freaking decade. Then you got J-Mo, who really hasn't come on yet at all. That's scary because that's a level that they don't have yet. And that means they're going to get better, folks. And here's the other guy that I haven't said yet. Sam Laporta. Dalton Kincaid was the number 1 tight end coming out of this class. Guess what? I'm wrong. So were other experts. They're wrong. Dalton Kincaid had a pretty good playoff game, but Sam Laporta this year played not only elite football for a rookie, but elite football at the tight end level. He was the top 5 tight end this year, and he was a rookie, right? So you're having all of these players that you're drafting hit. Check front office, right? You're winning games. You're out coaching games, and you're winning games. Check coaching staff. You've made key trades and key draft picks and moved up in the draft to make your team. Check team. They've already won a playoff game. That's what they needed to do this season. The Lions just needed to get over that hump, and I firmly believe that since the Lions won a playoff game this season, they will be back next year, and they will be back the year after, and they will be back the year after. This Lions team is not going away anytime soon, and they're continuing to win at a high level. And yes, that game was 24-23, and they definitely let the Rams come back into it, but it's Matthew Stafford against his former team, and Cooper Kupp, and Puka Nacua, and Williams, like you just said. And Puka Nacua had the best game for a rookie wide receiver ever. So, and Detroit still won. Like, you know what I mean? It's just their defense did not play as well as they usually do. But what I see happening for the Detroit Lions is I see them. I'm not going to give away my preview because that's next segment for our pick. But they're going to play the Buccaneers, like you just said. Juicy matchup. We'll get into it. But guess what? This team is only going to get better. Every single player I named is still under contract. They're not going to lose them. Also, I didn't hit any of their offensive line. Their offensive line's great, right? And they have really good linebackers and a few key pieces. You know, once again, C.J. Gardner-Johnson, right, from Philadelphia, their best safety this year, trade, right? I mean, they just have so many key trades that are doing so well. And look at how terrible Philadelphia's safeties are without him there, right? So Dan Campbell is making an ownership in front office needs a ton of claps for this season. I hope they keep winning because this is a fun football team. And hey, I haven't seen it in my lifetime, but now I have. Detroit Lions win a playoff game. I was born in 93. Last time Tanner said was 91. So really close, but Detroit's that's a squad. The Rams, you kind of thought they were done. You know, midway through the season, you were kind of like, nah, I guess that's it. You know, it still worked out because Stafford got a Super Bowl, right? Williams wasn't really panning out from Notre Dame. Cooper Kupp was hurt. You had this young rookie named Puka Nacua who is doing really well. But other than that, there wasn't a bright spot on the whole team. There wasn't a bright spot. And then they beat Seattle. That game we were at that we watched in person. Then they came back and beat Seattle when Geno Smith goes out of the game. And right there, you were kind of like, huh, something's feeling a little bit different about this team. Then they won again. Then they kept winning. Then you're like, oh, uh-oh. Now they're confident. And they got hot right before the playoffs, like you just mentioned. Nobody wanted to face them. I didn't want to face the Rams in the first round. I would have rather faced the Eagles or the Bucks or, the Packers, which obviously wasn't a good idea for the Cowboys. But I would rather face anybody than the Rams because of how hot they were and how good Matthew Stafford is in the playoffs. And as of recently, a Super Bowl champion. And guess what? Now Cooper Kupp's your number 2 and he's fully healthy. That's a scary football team. That's a really scary football team. And they haven't lost anybody on the defensive side of the ball, really. So, yeah, I mean, the Rams, I think this season is a success because, you at one point you weren't even close to making the playoffs, right? Like
Mhm.
they weren't even in the picture. And then they won in the last week and they got into the playoffs and yeah, they get bounced first round, but they almost beat a Detroit Lions team who is one of the hottest teams in the NFL and one of the best teams in the NFC this year. So, Rams future, I don't think it's as bright as, Detroit or Miami, but if Matthew Stafford comes back fully healthy and, Cooper Kupp's already there, Puka Nakua's already there, and Kerryon Williams is coming into his third year out of Notre Dame and they're going to feature him, then yeah, I think that football team is going to continue to be pretty good because the Rams don't care and somehow sign anybody they want to in free agency. So I think the Rams are going to be another team that's going to be on top of the NFC. I kind of see them in the same boat as Seattle. That teams that are kind of sitting outside of the playoff race, kind of looking in a little bit, even though they made the playoffs, but they're kind of that seed. One or two more games they could really make or miss the playoffs. So they need to continue to build in the draft. What I really want to see with the Rams is a quarterback of the future. You have
Mhm.
Sean McVay, you have Stafford there already. You have only a couple years left on that contract with Stafford, so bring in a guy. Bring in a young guy that can learn from Stafford. You've seen what happens, when you have these young quarterbacks and they actually sit. Once again, once we hit the quarterbacks in the NCAA section of this podcast in a couple weeks, you're going to see how many of those quarterbacks I say are first year starters. And guess what? Patrick Mahomes was not a first year starter. So if you're coming at me saying that doesn't make any sense, well, yeah, Patrick Mahomes did pretty good and Andy Reid did pretty good too. So moving on from that game, going to the Steelers and the Bills, I think we all knew this was going to happen. I think this was the one game that was a complete lock. No disrespect to the Steelers, but 31-17, Buffalo showed up, showed out, and beat the Pittsburgh Steelers. What'd you see in that one, Tanner?
I think it was, despite it Buffalo obviously being the better team, I just think Pittsburgh played a lot better than people thought they would. And that's just kind of the story of this back half of the season. They, fire Matt Canada from offensive coordinator and they don't really look back. I think that their offense was finally starting to get going and they were competitive in this game. I think at one point it was like a 7-point game if I'm not mistaken, but it's just I give a lot of credit to the coaching staff and what they were able to do with Mason Rudolph back at the helm because that's really
And no TJ Watt.
and no TJ Watt. I mean, yeah, that one was a big one. Obviously, if TJ had been there, it might have been a different game, but they still played really well against one of the hottest teams in the NFL. The Buffalo Bills at home in the snow. So it's just Pittsburgh Steelers, Mike Tomlin, he always has them playing well, and I think he's going to continue to do so. Even though his press conference was really funny, he just like walked right out. I'm assuming Tomlin's going to be back. I just don't see the point in firing him. I think he's too good of a head coach, and I mean he's getting these boys ready to play every single week, regardless of if it's the playoffs or not. So this is a good football team. Najee Harris hasn't had the most success in his NFL career, but he's starting to get on. George Pickens, Deontay Johnson, like these guys are good players. Like it's not that they're bad, but it's just like if you got Mason Rudolph throwing dimes back there and these guys are catching them and they're playing well, it's just like, yeah, well, it's going to happen. Winning's going to happen. So obviously they fell short, but it's hard to play that well against Buffalo when Josh Allen is doing Josh Allen things. That 52-yard scramble for a touchdown was just unreal. And I do think the Steelers need to start looking at revamping that defense because it really hasn't been, besides TJ Watt, the best unit, over the past couple of years. They need to get more pass rushers, get more guys in the secondary because these guys are, they're not the premier defenders of the NFL anymore. It's just they got to reload, and I have no doubt that Pittsburgh will. But recently they've been trying to figure out their offense, but their defense is kind of lacking too. So I think the offense is funny enough starting to get figured out, and now the defense doesn't really want to work. So going into the draft, I think defense and maybe take a couple offensive positions too, but it's Pittsburgh, man. They got to have a good defense. They always have to have a good defense. And it's not just TJ Watt anymore. We need a little bit more help because you saw what happens when he doesn't play. So give Buffalo all the credit, but Steelers still had a really good season. Definitely a lot of stuff to hang your hat on. And I don't know if Kenny Pickett's the future of the Pittsburgh Steelers, but I think he's going to get at least one more shot next year because you drafted him. You got to keep rolling with him, see what he does. It's like the Mac Jones situation over in New England. Obviously, he probably shouldn't have played this season, but it's Mac Jones. That's the guy you drafted. You got to stick with him, see what he does. And I think the same will stay for Kenny Pickett. But what did you think of that game besides Buffalo just, doing what Buffalo does?
I mean, you hit a lot of good points, right? You hit a lot of good points. I think that to start off, the Steelers' future, it all lies on Mike Tomlin.
Mm-hmm.
If you take Mike Tomlin out of this organization, I think this team is the bottom seed of that division for the next 5 to 10 years because he is that good. And the fact that he even got Pittsburgh to the playoffs this year is, I mean, just short of incredible, right? That was a team that was like, 500 all season and got hot at the end of the year and needed to win a couple key games, and they did. And they did it with a backup quarterback, and they did it with a lot of players that were already injured. TJ Watt was in and out of the lineup all season, and that's
Mm-hmm.
their entire defense. You know what I mean? Like you said, they definitely need to revamp their defense. But specifically this game, if you're coming into a playoff game and you have a backup quarterback, unless you're the Eagles and Nick Foles and you go win a Super Bowl, it doesn't usually result in wins. That's not your starting quarterback. That's not your starting running back. It's not your starting wide receiver. Like, it usually doesn't result in wins when your starters are out. And, when you have as many injuries as the Steelers did this season, and specifically with their quarterback, it's hard to say that this team is going to go in and win. And now here's the thing does Kenny Pickett actually give them a shot to win that game? In my opinion, no.
Mm-hmm.
In my opinion, Kenny Pickett was not a first round pick. I said that if you listen to the pod whenever he got drafted a couple of years ago, but you have to reach on quarterbacks, especially when you had an aging Ben Roethlisberger that clearly needed a replacement in Pittsburgh and was just kind of sitting there waiting to retire, right? And honestly, kind of played his last season where he probably shouldn't have played, but
Mm-hmm.
he did, and then he hung it up. So I think that the Steelers need a lot of help. Personally, I think the Steelers need a new quarterback. No, I'm not on the Kenny Pickett train. I could be wrong, but I usually am not, especially when I've seen a couple years of NFL tape. I don't think he's going to get to that next level. I don't think that if you get a better running back than Najee, that you can really revamp that offense as much as you think you can. So I think it starts with the quarterback. And I think really this league is a quarterback league. I don't think you can win with just running the ball anymore. I really don't. I haven't seen it work unless it's been Baltimore. And Baltimore this year is like the best they've ever looked because they sprinkled in a little bit more deep passes down the field, and they happen to get a speedy number one wide receiver. So, you know, my thing with the Pittsburgh Steelers is you need to get a new quarterback. I think Kenny Pickett would serve as a great backup. See you later, Mason Rudolph. And then you bring it into a competition. And that's when you get out the best in guys, right? You get Kenny Pickett, who's obviously the clear-cut starter next year, and then you take a guy at the end of the first round who's ever sitting there. Most likely, Bo Nix will be sitting there at the end of the first round. Maybe bring in Bo. I don't know how Oregon weather is compared to Pittsburgh weather. It's probably pretty freaking different. You know what I mean? Only been to Oregon once. I've also been to Pittsburgh too, actually, now that I think about it. But you need a quarterback. In my opinion, it starts there. Najee Harris is starting to come on. He's getting real close to that second contract, though.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you got to have Najee one more year until he gets that contract up. I don't think you can realistically re-sign Najee. No disrespect, because he just didn't really hit up until starting the end of this last season. And even then, he kind of disappeared at times completely. And finding running backs it seems to be easier than ever, especially in the later rounds. So I think you probably need to get a new running back as well. I think this offensive line is an aging offensive line. I think you need to address that. I think you have really good wide receivers. I think you need a number 3, but you have Deontay Johnson sitting there, and you also have George Pickens. That's a great number 1 and number 2. And like I said, you need to add a number 3. Tight end, with Pat Freiermouth sitting there, you could use an upgrade there, but not a bad tight end, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not a bad tight end sitting there too. Defense, TJ Watt. That's it. Every other position is up. So this is a team that is not necessarily in a rebuilding mode because they just made the playoffs, But I kind of look at this team as a team that isn't going to make the playoffs next year, even if Tomlin's back, probably be the bottom of that division and really start to invest in guys in the draft and start to build the dynasty like they did when they had Ben Roethlisberger, right? When they had Hines Ward, when they had Troy Polamalu, when they had, the Cameron Hayward of a young Cameron Hayward, right? They've got all these guys who are a little bit older now, right? A young Cameron Hayward was a mean, nasty defensive tackle, right? So I think the Steelers just need kind of a revamp around, and I would probably say was the worst team that made the playoffs roster, in my opinion. But keep Mike Tomlin, he's going to get it right. If you don't, good luck. Moving on to the Bills. Hottest team in football. They were the hottest team in football because they had to be. They could not lose a game at the end of the regular season to make the playoffs. Still haven't lost, right? Josh Allen, you have a couple quarterbacks in this league that when you put the word playoff in front of their name, they jump to a different level. These are the elite of the elite quarterbacks in the NFL. Patrick Mahomes is number 1, playoff Pat. Playoff Josh is getting real close to number 2. I understand he hasn't gotten past a lot of, he hasn't gotten to the divisional round and all that, but here's my thing. When he's playing like he is, if Buffalo would have somehow lost that game, it wouldn't have been his fault. And when they lost to the Chiefs, it wasn't his fault. Last year it was. He didn't play the best. But other than that, he's had one pretty bad playoff game, and the rest of them he's been good. And even then, last year wasn't bad. You know what I mean? He didn't play the best, but he didn't play Josh Allen's level. So now you have playoff Josh. And guess what finally happened? Stephon Diggs. Yeah. Stephon Diggs finally started to come through. They didn't really run the ball with James Cook, and it was snowy. They ran the ball with Josh Allen, and he hooped, son. That 52-yarder, he got hit by 4 people and just kept bouncing off like a, you know what I mean? Like a pinball machine. Like he just kept going. I wouldn't want to play Buffalo right now. I'm not going to go into who we're going to pick against them, but they have the best matchup next week. I cannot wait to watch the Buffalo Bills against the Kansas City Chiefs on Sunday night in the playoffs again next week. It's going to be great. But Buffalo, you know what you needed to do at the end of the season. You did it. You know what you need to do in the playoffs. You're doing it. And if you get past Kansas City, you're going to be playing Houston or Baltimore. So, it has been the easiest road. But they made the Steelers. They beat the Steelers. Now they got to beat the Chiefs. And then you got the Texans or the Ravens. And then you're in the Super Bowl against probably the 49ers. So good luck. And we'll see what happens. Is Buffalo the number 2 team in the AFC right now? Like I could put them above the Chiefs at this point. I can't put anybody above the Ravens. But I would not want to play Josh Allen right now if I was Mahomes.
No, they are the number 2 seed technically, but it's the magic of Josh Allen. It's just you get into the playoffs, and like you said, I think he said it perfectly. He just gets to a different level, and you just see something else coming out of him. And if he can beat Kansas City, let me say this, if he can beat, Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs, who have been his.
They're at home, right?
Yep.
Buffalo's at home?
Yeah, they're at home.
Ooh, that's big. Okay, keep going.
I think the first time they're at home, I'm not positive though, but it would make sense. But Buffalo's at home, man. They have finally a dominant running game that they can rely on. And Stephon Diggs, like you said, he just needs to continue to do what Diggs likes to do in the playoffs, and he's just that they can beat the Chiefs, in one of the Chiefs' worst years. So it's just if they can get over Kansas City, they might. They're probably not going to be the favorite because they're heading into Baltimore, but that could 100% be. Not counting out C.J. Stroud and the Texans because apparently we don't do that now. But you don't count Josh Allen out either. If those are the remaining 3 teams, depending on who wins the Ravens and Texans. Look out, man, because that's going to be, one of the biggest fireworks I've ever seen in an AFC championship game. Because if Josh Allen makes it to the championship game, I have no doubt that he will make the Super Bowl. It's the same thing with Lamar Jackson and the Baltimore Ravens. Like, it's just, It's one of those things, man. It's gonna be a rock and a hard between a rock and a hard place now. I'm not counting my chickens before they hatch. We gotta see what happens on Sunday Night Football with the Kansas City Chiefs, and if Patrick Mahomes, decides to pull out some of his own magic. But I that one's gonna be fun because I don't know. I just feel like Josh is locked and ready. He's ready to go.
And like you said, because Kansas City has historically gotten the number one seed every year, pretty much since they've been in, aside from this year. So you're right. Like, Buffalo has never hosted a playoff game outside of the current wild card round, which is pretty crazy to think. I mean, yes, previously they have in the history of their franchise, but as of recently they haven't. And that's arguably one of the reasons that, Josh Allen hasn't gone, because he's always walking into somebody else's barn. And when you're walking into Kansas City, that's a different kind of place to play,
It's hard to
right?
play.
That is a completely different environment and a completely different place to play than, you know, no offense, Tampa or something like that, right? Like you're walking into an environment where it's like, oh, this is the loudest football stadium in the entire league, and this is playoff Pat. So you said it. The Chiefs are the weakest they've ever been. It's not a question mark. It is a for sure statement, and it's pretty obvious. They led the league in drops this year. Can Buffalo's defense capitalize on that? Because what they did capitalize on when they played the Steelers was turnovers. Buffalo's defense completely capitalized on turnovers. Now, it was cold as shit in that game,
Hmm.
but it's also going to be cold again. It's the next weekend. So we'll see what happens with that one. It's also a nighttime game, so I can't wait to see it. But yeah, I wouldn't want to play the Buffalo Bills right now. Jump into the last two NFC games of the wild card round. We got the Eagles versus the Buccaneers, 32-9. Tanner and I both picked the Buccaneers. Got some interesting, some responses with that one. I guess not a lot of fans thought we were going to take the Bucks, but we did. And if you listen to us and won some money, you're welcome. But it wasn't even close. It was 32-9. The Eagles did get a touchdown in there. They went for two. They got the tush push finally stopped because they had Vita Vea, who's the biggest defensive tackle in the entire league, just sitting there, just like this, and he didn't even move, and they just hit him and fell down. It was awesome. The Bucks dominated him. But start us off, Tanner. You're shaking bake. You're Baker Mayfield's, guy. So take me through what happened with old Bake.
I know, but both my nickname teams have had success in the playoffs this year. It's pretty fun, except my regular teams, which I wish they would have had success too. But no, man, this is a good football team. Like I've been harping it all season. Like a lot of people forget, this is a Super Bowl defense that won a Super Bowl because of its defense. You remember that Super Bowl? It was Patrick Mahomes against the world because he didn't have anyone to throw to in that Super Bowl, and Tom Brady he was playing, doing enough. He wasn't being, 450 yards and 5 touchdowns, Tom Brady. He was managing the game and making sure things didn't get out of his hand, and he was letting the defense win the game for him. And that's what you saw again this week. Like, I don't know. It's just, we talk about quarterbacks who go up to another level when they get in the playoffs, but some defenses do the same thing. And I think this Tampa Bay defense is one of those examples. You look back on when this matchup happened a couple years ago, and it was the same result. Tampa against Philly, that one was another wild card round, and Philly also lost. So it's familiar teams and familiar results. So I really like this team heading forward. Baker Mayfield, he didn't have the most fantastic game, but he was putting it on the money. He was putting it on the money,
I
Mike.
mean, he was. I'm going to read his stat line to you real quick. When you say not the most fantastic game, I mean completion percentage wise, you're completely right. He was 22 of 36 for 337 and 3 touchdowns, and he took 4 sacks too.
Mm-hmm.
So not the best game stat wise, but shake and bake, baby. Keep going.
No, yeah, shake and bake. And I mean, like I said, I don't mean to, destroy this drum that I've been beating for the past, 20 weeks, but it's just, you put that man who's a gunslinger behind that offensive line and those receivers, and you're going to get results. And not to mention, they can run the ball now, which is something Tampa Bay hasn't done in recent memory. So, come on. I just don't, I don't know. It's a hard team not to be a fan of. And the Philadelphia Eagles, I think, are just weak. They don't have a lot of players that are healthy right now. Their defense has not been playing up to the standard of Philadelphia right now. And Jalen Hurts is just not the Jalen Hurts that we saw last year. He's obviously pretty banged up, and I think he's, not letting on as much as is going on in the back of the scene, but I just don't think they were ready to play that game. I don't think that they were physically ready or mentally ready to play that game, and I think that lands on the players and the coaching staff, but it's just they didn't look like they were trying. Like I saw the Dallas Goedert interaction with Jalen Hurts on the bench, and just Dallas is just ripping into Jalen, and Jalen just stone cold, doesn't really make anything out of it, doesn't really react or anything like that. And you want to see that from your quarterback. You don't want him to get heated on the sideline, but like it just didn't really look like they were ready to play, and that's not something you want to see with a playoff football team, a football team who was in the Super Bowl last year. And I don't know, man. I don't know what's wrong with this team, but it fell downhill real quick. I mean, they were 10-1, and now they're out of the playoffs at I think 11-7 technically because they lost this game. But what did you see? Because I saw a whole lot of nothing from Philadelphia's side. They couldn't do anything that they wanted to do. Devontae Smith is pretty good, but other than that, there's not a whole lot else to look at when it comes to this team right now. I mean, they've just fallen off a cliff, and they're dead.
they fell off the cliff and they died. That's it. We're done.
Pretty much.
No, the thing is with the Eagles is that, I mean, this is one of the worst collapses to an end of the season that in NFL history, right? Like we always bring up Arizona that's 8-0 and then went 0-8 and was 8-8 to end the year. This is right up there with that. The Eagles went, 10 and then just lost, like just lost, right?
Six of their last 7, combining this
six
playoff
of their
game.
last 7, including the playoff game. Exactly. Thank you. So when you have that big of a lead in the NFC East and you lose it, and you didn't even lose it in the last week of the season, they lost it the week before. So that shows you how bad the Philadelphia Eagles were being toward the end of the season. Now, I'm going to hit on the Bucs first, and then I'm going to get into Philadelphia because I've been really thinking about Philadelphia, and I also have some good friends that I talk to that are Philadelphia fans too. So I have their insight as well here. But the Buccaneers, you nailed it again. I guess that's why I brought you on the pod, because you quite literally, Baker Mayfield of the Buccaneers, you called that week 1. You called that week 1. The Lions with the offense, that happened real early. You called that one too, right? So you have had some crazy calls. Oh, by the way, the random Raheem Mostert call before the beginning of the season, a 31-year-old running back who loses the starting job to a rookie. The rookie gets hurt. Mostert wins the starting job back. Throughout this whole time, he's still getting a touchdown or 2 every single game.
Broke
So
Ricky Williams' touchdown record in Miami. Just saying, continue. Ricky Williams. That's a pretty big name.
That's why you listen. That's why you listen to us. This is RDH Sports. The H is for both of us, right? Wow. What a game by Baker Mayfield. What a game. What a performance in the biggest game of his career to date. What a game. Like I said, 337 and 3 touchdowns in a playoff game. If he would have completed 6 more passes, or if he would have not completed 6 more passes, he would have been 50% completion percentage, which is not good. You don't expect to see that much yards off a completion percentage. It is not that great. Now, here's where I really want to dive into this game, because this is what you're not going to believe. His leading receiver was Kate Otten with 8 receptions for 89 yards. Right underneath that was David Moore for 66 yards. Trey Palmer, 56 yards. Mike Evans, 48 yards. Chris Godwin, 45 yards. Payne Durham, 18 yards. Chase Edmonds, 8 yards. Devin Tompkins, 4 yards. Rashad White, 3 yards. Was Mike Evans or Chris Godwin number 1 or number 2 in that list? No. Was Mike Evans or Chris Godwin between number 1 and number 3 in that list? No. Was Mike Evans and Chris Godwin number 4 or number 5 on that list? Yes. What that's telling me is that you have a quarterback who is throwing to the open wide receiver. He's throwing to the open wide receiver, K. Dotton being a tight end, throwing to the open wide receiver, throwing to the tight end. He's diming him. He's throwing everywhere, right? Both hands. I don't know why the heck I'm doing that. He's got 2 footballs, he's throwing both hands, right? He's throwing everywhere. When you look at the Eagles side, Devontae Smith, 8 for 148 yards. The closest wide receiver is the running back, DeAndre Swift, with 32 yards after that. 32 yards after that. So the Buccaneers clearly spread the ball out way better than the Philadelphia Eagles did that game, right? That's number one. Number two, I wanted to call out their rushing game. Rachaad White had 18 rushes for 72 yards. Total, they had 29 carries on the team for 119 yards and 0 touchdowns. It's not that great.
No.
It's not that great. That game was completely on Baker Mayfield and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense, because the Philadelphia Eagles had 2 turnovers that resulted in fumbles, and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers ended up getting those. Jamal Dean and Levante David had to call them out because a hell of a game, first of all, between the both of them. Jamal Dean had 10 total tackles with 9 solo tackles, which is what?
That's
In a
pretty
playoff
nice.
game, you almost have a 10-piece solo tackles. That's incredible. So Tanner said earlier in this year, Tampa Bay Buccaneers were built on their defense first, and then they go to their offense next. That's the formula they did this whole season. They won the division the last week, barely, and they destroyed the Philadelphia Eagles 9-32, held them to 1 touchdown, a missed tush push, and an extra point, or in a field goal. That's it. That's all they did. And that's against the Philadelphia Eagles with a roster of Jalen Hurts, Dallas Goedert, Devontae Smith, DeAndre Swift. You know, A.J. Brown was out this week. But that's what I'll say about the Buccaneers. Heck yeah. Heck yeah. I think the season's done after this week, but still, great,
Pretty nice.
great freaking organization. And you can't let Baker go.
Nope.
You cannot let Baker go. Baker is the quarterback here for at least the next couple years. But this is a good team. And I think this is a team that, as long as Bill Belichick doesn't go to Atlanta, is going to continue to win that division for, the next 3-4 years. I think it looks very bright in Tampa Bay. Now, the Philadelphia Eagles. Oh man.
Open this can of worms.
Get ready, because we're going to talk about the Eagles for a while, and we're going to talk about the Cowboys for a while, folks. If you're an Eagles fan, sorry. If you're a Dallas fan, next segment, sorry. But here we go. Jalen Hurts. He was not the same quarterback as last year. I'm going to be the first one to tell you that he wasn't. When he was winning games, he was, but the rest of the season, he wasn't. Do I think that is a result of his injury? Yes, 100%. I do not think that Jalen Hurts has fallen off. I do not believe the hype that Jalen Hurts is not a good quarterback in the NFL. I don't believe that hype or those conversations at all. I'm sorry, I don't. Devontae Smith had 8 for 148. Jalen Hurts can throw the freaking ball. And his knee hurts. His finger was just disgusting. The fact that he even played, that's football and hockey. Those are the only 2 sports they'll do that in. But he's not going anywhere. Let's just get that out of the way now. He is the best leader in the NFL, and he is one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. So I don't think he's going anywhere. Dallas Goedert. That's passion. That's all that is. It's passion. He wants to win the game. He wants to continue to move on. Dallas Goedert, still on a contract, young. He's going to stay. Devontae Smith. And Devontae Smith. He's got a contract coming up real soon. And up until last week, and a couple games in his career sprinkled in, he's a number 2 wide receiver. Now he's a number 1. So you got to pay him like a number 1. And you already got a number 1 with A.J. Brown, who was hurt. You can't let A.J. Brown walk. If you let A.J. Brown walk, I'm sorry. Devontae Smith, maybe he's a number 1. I need to see him a full season at being a number 1 wide receiver. But A.J. Brown has bailed out the Philadelphia Eagles this year in a couple games when Jalen wasn't playing well. So I think the offense stays pretty much the same for the Philadelphia Eagles over the offseason, except your center for the last decade has officially retired and was the best offensive lineman on the Philadelphia Eagles since he was there as a rookie. So, well, I guess the Philadelphia Eagles had Jason Peters. He was, pretty decent, right, at the left tackle position. Maybe that was the only other guy that kind of gave him a run for his money. But he's gone. In a new center, you may not think it's big, but it's big. Speaking from experience, Dallas had one with Travis Frederick. Unfortunately, he had to retire due to disease illness that he had. And we being the Dallas Cowboys, had to go get another center. And a couple of years of that was not very fun. And there was a lot of missed fumbles, a lot of missed handoffs, and a lot of bad plays just because Dallas had a new center. So the Philadelphia Eagles need to take the first round center. They absolutely need to. They have to take a center in the first round. I'm going to pull up my guy real quick because I have him ranked.
He's ready.
And I've already watched a scouting, watched a lot of tape on this center. But the Philadelphia Eagles need to definitely get a center, and that center is, here we go. He is from Oregon, but it's kind of hard because here's the thing. The center in this year's draft has not necessarily, I don't think they have a first round center specifically. I don't think they have a center that's supposed to go in the first round. A lot of tackles this year. A lot of tackles. This class is tackle heavy. So probably in the second round is when I'm seeing that they'll take a center. They've got a really good center that I've watched out of West Virginia, Zach Frazier. I'd give him a third round grade. So that's a guy that you could go get in the early third round. And then Jackson Powers Johnson, the center out of Oregon. That's a lot of experts consensus number one. He's a junior. I got a late second round grade on the player, but I mean, he's the best center in the upcoming draft. In my opinion, it's not even close. He's given up 0 sacks and 3 quarterback hurries in 3 seasons. Okay. 3 seasons. And the reason I have a late second on this player, I'm going to change that right now. I got an early second on him. I don't know why I said late. Is the versatility. And here's the reason this player may get drafted higher than anticipated because of his versatility, because he played mostly right guard in 2022. And then he literally switched to center in the last season and was the best center in college football. So it is a new player in a new position, but he also has the ability to play guard. You don't typically see a lot of guards that go to centers. You do see some tackles that go to guard, but you don't see the guards that go to centers. So that's a guy, if you're an Eagles fan, to really, really keep an eye on that you could get. But the offense itself, the core is there, and everybody's under contract aside from Devontae Smith. Everybody's pretty much under contract. You have an aging offensive line. You have some young offensive linemen there, and you also have 2 running backs that are under contracts. You're not going to go a different direction with running backs, right? Mm-hmm. So the Philadelphia Eagles on the offensive side, I think are good. Now they're going to have new coordinators for sure. Philadelphia Eagles are 100% going to have a new offensive coordinator and a new defensive coordinator. Absolutely. No way they don't, right? No shot they don't. So that's what I'm interested to see. I'm interested to see a new center in the organization. I'm interested to see a new offensive scheme in the new organization. And I'm interested to see a new offensive coordinator and probably a new defensive coordinator. Thank you, Zach. Thank you, Jeremy, for giving me that insight there as an Eagles fan, because you think that that's going to happen, right? So those are the 3 positions that I see needing to happen immediately. On the defensive side of the ball, that's a whole different can of worms. Because this defense, arguably, the worst defense we've seen the Philadelphia Eagles since Jalen Hurts has been at quarterback. I mean, they did not play good. Mm-hmm. They really didn't. Even in games they won, they didn't necessarily play that well. Mm-hmm. So the defense doesn't necessarily need a whole revamp because they have some really good players, especially at the defensive tackle position. Also have a couple key guys at the cornerback position, but they lost a lot of their guys in free agency this season. They didn't pay them. And you saw what happened. They lost them, right? Because so much of their money is on the offensive side of the ball and not on the defensive side of the ball. Whew. Last thing I'll say. This draft class, Philadelphia Eagles have had the best 2 drafts. Personally, in my opinion, aside from the Detroit Lions last year, Philadelphia Eagles had the best draft last year, and the year before that, they had the best draft. So I would build through the draft, and I would get a center as high as you can get him, either in the, because you're picking at the end of the first. If you think somebody's going to jump in and take him in the second, I would 100% take him at the end of the first, reach a little bit, because you know how important that franchise center is, Kelsey. And then you just go defense after that. Rounds 2 through 7, you're drafting defensive players. And it positions that you don't necessarily already have, right? Maybe don't go get another defensive tackle, right? Like, you got some young guys there that are, I don't know if you're going to get anybody better in college football, right? Defensive ends, there's some definite defensive ends that they could get in. And once again, we're going to see what type of players they're going to get in when this new scheme comes in. We don't know with this new scheme. So that's my really, long-winded answer about what the Philadelphia Eagles should do. What do you think?
I mean, there's not much disagreement. You look at the Philadelphia Eagles in the past, and that defense is built through the draft. They have historically let guys go. Example A is Eric Kendricks. He went over to the
Yeah.
Vikings, former Philadelphia, middle linebacker, and he was one of the greats. They let him go, and they're continuing to build through that draft. So it's just one of those things that they do very well, and I have no doubt that they're going to continue to build through the draft, continue to get guys on that team that are going to help improve it. And like you said, they have players in there already that are cornerstones. That defensive line is really good right now, just specifically at the DTs, and I think Big Play Slay, he's pretty good, and it's just there's a lot of key pieces all around that defense that know what that defense should be. In the last episode we talked about like how do you rebuild a team? It's with those key players and then young other players that are hungry and want to win. So you have the guys who know how to win, and you have the guys who want to win. And old guys teach the young guys, and then you make this beautiful tree of Philadelphia Eagles. So it's just I have no doubt that they're going to be back and that defense is going to be fine. They just had an off year due to all the the free agents that left and the defensive coordinators and stuff like that have left. And it was a transition year, is what we like to call it. So I think they'll be fine. I think that offense will be fine. It's kind of hard to go down from here, but we'll see what happens. I think they're going to get an offensive coordinator who's going to know how to use those guys. I mean, they have so much talent. It's hard to say that they won't succeed in the future. So I have no doubt in my mind. Philly's going to be back. In what capacity? I don't really know. How long it's going to take to rebuild back up to that Super Bowl caliber team? I don't know. But I think they have a lot of good pieces already in place, and they can continue to build through the draft and continue to get some offensive talent, specifically, coordinators and stuff like that. I think their roster is pretty good on offensively, and absolutely get that center because I know people don't, they don't realize how big a center is in football, but it's very big. That's a Hall of Fame center that just left, and these guys are not getting any younger. So it's just this offensive line will need a big revamp, and it's starting with the center because
Um, You have to, right? I mean, especially when you're so used to Jason Kelsey, right?
yes.
Like, I mean, like Kelsey's been the best center over the last decade in the entire NFL, and it really hasn't even been close. So yeah, I completely agree with you. You definitely have to get that center in there. They have a lot of key pieces that they can continue to build around, and now those veterans are going to turn into even more veteran status, and they're going to help these young guys, like you said. And we'll see what happens with Philadelphia. I think there's going to be a lot of coaching changes to summarize it up, and
hmm
I think that this team and the Dallas Cowboys next year are going to be once again 1-2, 2-1, competing for the NFC East. That's
Yep.
this team is too good to not make a deep playoff run every single season. Now, jumping to the next team that we're going to talk about, the next matchups we're going to talk about, the Cowboys and the Packers. For those of you who don't listen to this show, Tanner and I are massive Dallas Cowboy fans. We've had season tickets since we were 6 years old. Tanner even younger than that, me 6 years old. To go to the Cowboy games. We've been going all the time, right? Gone to all the playoff games. Seen Aaron Rodgers destroy the Cowboys before. Thank God it didn't happen again. Oh wait, it did, but it's by the name of Jordan Love. The Green Bay Packers beat the Cowboys 48-32. It it was not a 16-point game. I know the end of the game was a 16-point game, but it was not a 16-point game. The Packers dominated that game from the very first possession. I think if you were a Cowboy fan, a diehard Cowboy fan like Tanner and myself are that watch way too much football, you knew the Cowboys were going to lose after the first possession of that game because you were like, oh no. The Packers are hitting on all cylinders. Like I said earlier, all the bounces are going their way. And guess what? When you got a quarterback that's under center, looks like Brett Favre when he's taking the snap, and when he rolls out, he looks like Aaron Rodgers. That's not a quarterback you want to play, especially in the wild card round. What did you think about this game? Go ahead and take us through your mindset first.
It's hard because where do you start? Because you watch that defensive performance from the Cowboys, and it was just probably the worst thing you've seen all season. Aside from like Arizona or Buffalo or San Francisco, but it's just they just didn't really look like they came to play. Very similar story with the Philadelphia Eagles. Like we talked about earlier, it just didn't look like they were ready. And I don't know how you're not ready for a home playoff game, which you've been predicting is going to happen for the last couple of weeks. But it's just they didn't show up. Micah finally drew some holding calls, which was fun. I think he was pissed and he was trying to get in there, but we've seen it time and time again. These teams, they just take away Micah Parsons and then they can just do whatever they want on defense because realistically, the secondary is not that good. Stephon Gilmore has played pretty well as a Cowboy, but not the best. Deron Bland is Diggs 2.0. He's didn't have a lot of time in this game where he got beat, but it was just because you never saw him because they were never there because it was a busted coverage. So it's just these receivers were wide open and not a little wide open, like 25 steps wide open. Like these are wide open people in the middle of the field with nobody realizing what to do. It's just not a really good situation, when your defense puts you in like, these long drives and the defense is on the field for a long time and you have to go down and you have to score every single time if you're the offense. But it's just, that's the card that you were played. Defense isn't always going to win you games, but in this one, they could have done a little bit better, I will say. The defensive line, even with Jonathan Hankins being in there, looked terrible. They didn't look good at all. DeMarcus Lawrence didn't get any pressure from the other side of Micah, even though Micah was being double teamed consistently every single time. Nobody else was getting pressure. Like I said, I think Micah was on one. He was drawing some penalties. He was playing well, but like that's not enough. Like you got to get in there. You got to get in there and make big plays, get sacks, and stop drives. But it's just, it didn't happen. It didn't happen at all. The defense looked terrible, and that's pretty much the bottom line of that. With the offense, it doesn't help when Dak Prescott reverts back to his 2022 form. He's just trusting his receivers and throwing the balls into double blanketed coverage, and it's just missing wide open throws to the back of the end zone, doing all this stuff that is just not going to win you football games. There's just that Tony Pollard throw specifically, which could have potentially gotten them back in the game. That little wheel route that went out and he just missed it by a mile. Tony Pollard was wide open on that. And where the heck was CeeDee Lamb? Michael Gallup had played pretty well. It was the first time we've seen him all season, basically. And the Cowboys just didn't look like they knew what to do. They put themselves in these third and long situations that really didn't help. That was, one of these times that just like Dak can't do that. He's not getting any time in the pocket. He's not executing the game plan. He's not playing his best football, which sucks because, you want your franchise quarterback to be playing his best in the playoffs. He wasn't. And they didn't really do a whole lot on offense. I think you said it after the game. The best part of that game was Tony Pollard, which is not what I thought going into that game, but he played pretty well. And I think they played off of him pretty well, but they just missed these big throws and these passes. CeeDee Lamb had a couple of drops, and Jair pretty much locked him up for the most part. So, it's all over the place, but that's because there was not really a good part of this game. I think you look back to the Green Bay Packers, the team that Dallas played, I think it was last season, not counting, the season we're currently in as last season, but the one before this one in 2022. They went to Green Bay, they played at Green Bay, and they lost to Aaron Rodgers in overtime to a field goal. And it's just that wasn't the case here. They got a lot more destroyed, but it's the same things that I saw happen in that game and this game. They just got outcoached. McCarthy didn't really know what to do. The defense got outcoached. LaFleur's scheme was just, hands and toes better. Jordan Love didn't have any pressure on him the entire night, and Dak Prescott had all the pressure on him all night. And it's just like they couldn't do anything. I think you saw the Dak Prescott of old, where he's rolling out of the pocket trying to make plays down the field. That's not what the system is, man. We've been over this time and time again. It's not what we're supposed to do. That's not what this scheme is designed to do. Dak's trying to make plays. I get that, but like quick reads, these quick drop backs. And when they were doing that, they were having some success. But overall, they just couldn't put together, I think, a good enough game plan, to play this game. And I don't know how, you were anticipating having to play one of these bottom teams. You didn't know which one it was going to be. It was going to be, we talked about it, Seattle, LA, maybe even like Tampa or the Falcons or heck, even like New Orleans Saints. But it's going to be one of these teams that are hungry and looking in and are going to get a playoff spot. and they got the Packers, and it was the worst draw for them ever. Because I mean, I don't know. There's a lot of things you can say about this game, but they just got out coached. They just got outplayed in every single capacity. It wasn't really close ever. You know, I just don't know what happened. I don't know how you're the number 2 seed. You play so well all season long. Um, you lose a couple big games during the season, yes, but like this is a game you can win. This is 100% a game you can win. Looking on just the outside looking in, it's just one of those games where you can't drop, you can't play bad in. What does Dallas do? They put up the worst playoff game in the history of the Cowboys, and they look terrible. And it's just, what do you do? You know what I mean? Like, what do you do? Because Mike McCarthy has had 3 12-5 seasons back to back to back, and they've lost in terrible fashion every time. They don't look good in the playoffs under Mike McCarthy. They don't. And you can look back to those games. We can look back on his tenure. I have them ready if you want to go over Mike McCarthy's time here in Dallas. I'll let you talk first, but like, what do you do? What do you do going forward? How do we address this? And what the heck did you see? What should they have done better? I don't know, man. Like, there's just so many questions to be had for this team right now, and not a lot of answers.
Yeah, I mean, and that's why you and I get to talk about this, and the listeners get to listen about this until the NFL draft, right? You got free agency, you got the draft, you got everything. But go ahead with those Mike McCarthy stats, because I'm interested to hear those. And then once you're done with that, I'll go ahead and kind of go with what I think, because I'm gonna go for a little bit of a rant.
I mean, Mike McCarthy, since he's been here, he's 1-3 in the playoffs, and that's including this season. So the first season he was here, you remember Dak Prescott had his big injury, carted off the field. Cowboys were surprisingly 6-10, which was not like the worst season it could have been. But moving on, it's a transitionary period, whatever. Dak got hurt. You can't really blame that on McCarthy. 2021, first year Dak's healthy. They go 12-5. They lose to the Niners 23-17 in the wild card round. They didn't play terrible in that entire game, but they played from behind and they didn't play well. That was not great. Next season, 12-5 again. Beat Tampa Bay 31-14 in the wild card. We remember that game. Dak played awesomely. I think he had like 4 or 5 touchdowns. Looked like a different quarterback, really. But divisional round, they went to Ninerland. San Francisco. They lost 12-19, and that's in a divisional round to get to the NFC Championship game with a Niner team that hasn't looked its best, in that playoff game. Brock Purdy was not at his best. Dak Prescott threw multiple interceptions in that game. And in this season, 12-5. Once again, 48-32 loss to the Packers in the wild card round. They didn't look great either. Dak Prescott with multiple interceptions too, another pick six, and that's pretty much what he's done here in Dallas, specifically playoff appearances and records throughout the season. What do you think, Chad? What do you think about old McCarthy?
I mean, I'll start here. So what do you do if you're the Dallas Cowboys in the offseason? What do you do, right? What do you do starting now? What do you do, right? If I'm the Dallas Cowboys, I understand that Mike McCarthy has won or had 3 12-5 seasons. I understand that. But Dallas isn't they're not looking for a good regular season.
Mm-hmm.
They're looking for playoff wins. And that was the stipulation on that contract, was you need to win playoff games, not just game, you win playoff games. And you saw the report that came out about specifically Mike McCarthy, how he was going to be judged on this last game. Now, this last game, yeah, of course you could have said he needed to make coaching adjustments. He didn't make any coaching adjustments, neither Dan Quinn coming out of half. He looked like a deer in headlights this game. But this one wasn't all on McCarthy. This was on Dak.
Mm-hmm.
Dak played horribly. I understand that Dallas put up 32 points, but those were garbage points.
Yeah.
And if CeeDee Lamb didn't make a couple great catches toward the end there, Dallas wouldn't have broken, the 30 burger. Green Bay almost broke the 50 burger, right? And when you're a top 5 defense in the NFL and you let a 50 burger happen, you're not going to win the game, just like Cleveland, what happened with Houston, right? So what do you do if you're Dallas? If this was any other season, I think Jerry would re-sign Mike McCarthy, but it's not. And the reason that I don't think that Dallas is going to re-sign Mike McCarthy or the offensive coordinator or the defensive coordinator is because you have guys like Harbaugh, Vrabel, Belichick, Carroll. You've got, and I'm not even talking about the up-and-coming OCs and DCs of the league. We won't even get into that. That's just those guys that are sitting there available to coach. So, yeah, I think that Dallas lets Mike McCarthy go after 3 12-5 win seasons, but you only have one playoff win. Here's a stat that's going to blow your mind. CJ Stroud has half as many playoff wins as Dak Prescott does. And CJ Stroud's been in the league. This is his first year. So, what do you do with the coaching staff? You clean house. Dan Quinn had already moved on. He'd already moved on in that game. It was pretty obvious. There was no defensive adjustments when halftime came. After halftime, nothing changed. The Green Bay Packers did the exact same game plan, and it worked. Dallas's offense started to get going a little bit because Dak Prescott wasn't throwing out of bounds every play or throwing to the other team every play or trying to force feed the ball to CeeDee Lamb like he used to do at Dez Bryant and get interceptions. And that's why Dez walked, right? And Dez went to the Ravens. So I think this game was on Dak Prescott. And I think that the organization needs to seriously, organization meaning Jerry Jones and Stephen Jones, and they need to talk to player personnel and they need to see what they're going to do about this quarterback situation. Because Dak Prescott has won 2 playoff games his entire career. And you just said it, his last playoff win was not that long ago against Tampa Bay. And he hasn't even gotten close since. So the big question is what's going to happen with Dak Prescott? That's the big question. Because you already know CeeDee Lamb's getting re-signed. There's no way Dallas is letting not only CeeDee Lamb, but another 88 walk. Dallas doesn't give out that number. It's if you get 88, you're going to be there for at least a decade.
Here. He's going to be here.
CeeDee's going to be here, and CeeDee is going to earn every single penny that he gets. Now, what do Tanner and I always say about quarterbacks? If you're going to replace the quarterback, I need a better option. There isn't a better option out there right now. Dak Prescott is easily the best option out there to give you the ability to win games in the regular season. I don't know. Does Russell Wilson give you that option to win more playoff games than Dak? I don't think so. Based off of his regular season play that he did, I don't even know if Dallas can make the playoffs if they got Russ, right? I think that Dallas needs to make, well, let me say this. Dak has one more year on his contract. I don't think Dallas is going to move on from Dak Prescott this season. I don't. I really don't think they're going to do it because if you go look at the history of the Dallas Cowboys, specifically the history of quarterbacks and contracts with the Dallas Cowboys, a lot of quarterbacks don't get cut or get traded in the final year of their contract because Dallas likes to play that out. And if they even get to the final year of their contract, that's not the time that you typically can cut the quarterback to get the least amount of dead money. Usually you have that a couple years before the final year of the contract so you can get out of the contract in 2 years. Hence, different position, Ezekiel Elliott. That's why they did that. They structured it up front. In the middle, it gets cut. We can save the most money here. Boom, he's gone. He still had a couple years left on his contract. Dak Prescott's on his last year, this next year. And he was in the playoff. He was in the MVP conversation this year. This year. He was a top 3 quarterback this year in the regular season. So you're going to let him walk? Right? You're going to let him walk, but at the same time, how do you value a quarterback that has won 2 games in 9 years in the playoffs? How do you value that quarterback? That's my biggest question for the Cowboys. This year, a lot's not going to change. I can tell you that right now. And that's my personal opinion as a Dallas Cowboys fan and watching the Cowboys. I don't think this roster is going to change a whole lot. But what I do think is going to change is the coaching staff completely. And now you have it again, right? When Mike McCarthy and his coaching regime came in, you had the excuse of Dak Prescott being like, well, can't be Dak. Got a new coaching staff. Nope. Well, now that's up. That excuse is completely gone because you're going to bring in another coaching staff. This is the 3rd coaching staff that Dak Prescott is going to have. We think, or I think at least, I think they're going to bring in a whole new coaching staff, especially with these guys out there. Who do you bring in though? Me? I'm sprinting to get Harbaugh. Sprinting. That man went to a Super Bowl and almost won it with Colin Kaepernick.
Yep.
You're telling me Dak Prescott's a better quarterback than Colin Kaepernick than he was at that time? In my opinion, Dak is. So I don't even think it's an option because Mike McCarthy was supposed to be the quarterback guru. He did this season, this one season, Mike McCarthy played or was calling the plays, and Dak was balling. Dak was hooping. But in big games, he didn't show up again. And in the playoffs, he didn't show up again. So I don't think you're going to cut him. I don't think I've seen rumors of that flying around. That's not going to happen. I think if anything, you will see Dak Prescott be traded. But I also don't see that happening because this quarterback class in the first round specifically is loaded. You got 5-6 guys that are probably going to go in the first round, if not early second too. And that's me putting JJ McCarthy, the quarterback from Michigan, in the second round, right? You've got a lot of quarterbacks that you could get, some in the late 20s as well. So I think a more realistic picture is Dallas because they don't trade. They do not trade as of recently for star players, specifically quarterbacks. When was the last time Dallas traded for a quarterback? Well, saw how well that ended up with. No offense, Andy Dalton. No offense, Drew Bledsoe. No offense, Testaverde. No offense to all those guys, but didn't really work out too well, right? I don't think that's going to happen. But if you have to trade Dak, this is a year to do it because you're trading him to a team, and that team is immediately re-signing him to another contract because he's going to be there. Now, if you're a team that's in desperate need of a quarterback, maybe you make that trade. But you're going to have to give up a lot of draft capital to get Dak Prescott of the Dallas Cowboys. So more realistically, I think what Dallas is going to do is take a quarterback early. And that is very obvious because you already have Trey Lance sitting there, who they traded not a super high draft pick for, but you have a draft pick for, and Dak Prescott in a rookie quarterback in the quarterback room. That's a 3 quarterback system, or not system. That's a 3 quarterback competition because I need somebody competing against Trey Lance because Trey Lance is not competing against Dak Prescott. Sorry, Dak Prescott's competing against nobody. It's just that simple. It's his job. He's not going to lose it, right? It's not going to. It's Jerry Jones. He loves his quarterbacks. The second and third is what I really need to see. I really need to see a step up from those. So I think what Dallas does in a long-winded answer is I think the coaching staff is gone. I think you get a coach that they don't lose in the playoffs. You never have we got outcoached again. Man, there's next season. Maybe we won't get outcoached again. It happens every year. You're in the playoffs. That's the best teams. They have the best coaches, right? That's kind of the trend that happens. Maybe not the best coaches, but pretty good coaches right there, right? In no universe should Mike McCarthy have been outcoached in that game. He won a Super Bowl in Green Bay. He won a Super Bowl there. There's no way, shape, or form that he should get outcoached against the Packers. Any other team, okay, but against the Packers, that's unacceptable. And Dan Quinn, sorry, you did really good, but this season specifically, in games that we needed to win, the defense sucked. Sorry, they did. They sucked, and that's all Dan Quinn. So that's my opinion on that one. Offense-wise, bye. OC, we'll be seeing you. And Mike McCarthy will also be seeing you. You won 1 playoff game, and you lost to San Francisco by pretty much 7 each time, and then got smacked in the mouth by your former team. And that former team is probably going to be the matchup. Maybe not. Maybe they win the division. But I don't know. Detroit looks pretty good for the next 5-10 years, right? You're going to be looking at the Green Bay Packers at the outside looking in, like you were saying, at the 7th seed. So they're not going away anytime soon. And if you win the division in the NFC East, which you want to do, and you need to do because you play better at home, then there's no other option. So I think this year you're going to see a whole new coaching staff. And then I think next year is when you're going to, not this next year coming up, but the year after that, when Dak Prescott's contract is up, I think that's when you'll see a bigger shakeup in the organization. Because you can't pay Dak again for the 3rd time if he still only won 2 playoff games. So that's my long-winded answer to your question.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really happy that you addressed the Dan Quinn issue too, because I think it is an issue. Just like reeling back in on that point too, like Dan Quinn, he's done a lot of great stuff here, and he's been here for 3 years, but he doesn't win his defense doesn't show up in these big games. You know, we praise
Never.
Dan Quinn and we're like, let's go, keep him here. He's made this defense awesome. You know, we've had awesome corners. Micah Parsons is great. You know, we've had so many sacks over these past couple of years, but go look at San Francisco this game this past year. Go look at Buffalo this game this past year. Heck, even go look at Miami, which was a
Miami.
pretty close game, but they lost it. You know, heck,
And
go look at Detroit.
you,
They limited him,
I was
but
gonna say you could say the Lions game too, because there
they
was a controversy at the end of that one.
they should have lost that game. And it's just one of those things. You have to play well. If you have a good defense, it has to be a good defense all the time, or else it's not a great defense. You know, it's just they beat up on the bad teams and they lose against the good teams. You know, it's very similar to Miami with their defense and how they're playing right now. But I'm really glad you brought up that point because I think Dan Quinn, while his time here was very good, you know, we praised him a lot for what he's done with his defense. He used to be a whole lot worse, trust me. But it's time for him to go, and it's time for someone else to take the reins on that project. With the head coach and stuff, I don't know because it's so hard to put Dak Prescott in a position where he's on the last year of his deal and you're going to bring in an entirely new coaching staff with an entirely new scheme and expect him to, you know, play as well as he did in this scheme this upcoming year. So it almost seems unfair to me to judge him based on this upcoming year. You know, it sucks, but it's like he's going into the last year of his contract. The last thing you want is uncertainty with a coaching staff or new things, new variables to pop up with a new coaching staff. Like, let's say, like, you know, you go grab Bill Belichick. He comes in here in the first year, isn't that great? What do you do? Who do you blame? Do you blame Bill? Do you blame Dak? Like, what is it? You know, it's just it's uncertainty with a new coaching staff and a quarterback who's on their last deal. It's
And
hard.
and real quick to hit on that last deal point, I just pulled up spotrac.com. They're really great in terms of contracts. So this year, which is really interesting. So the base salary of Dak Prescott's contract, he re-signed it in 2021 at age 28, 2.7 million base salary, 13 million signing bonus. He restructured 1.2 million, cap hit of 17 million in that year. Dead cap 95 million in 2021. Okay, 2022. Base salary of 1.6 million. Signing bonus 13.2, restructured 4.9 million, cap hit 19.7, dead cap 108 million. 2023, 1.7 million base salary, 13.2 million signing bonus, restructure 11.9 million, cap hit 26 million with a dead cap of 89 million. Okay? This is 2024 now. Base salary 29 million.
There's the deal. There it is.
There's the deal. The potential out is 2024. By the way, that's the season. 13.2 million, $5 million with the roster, 12.25 restructure, 59 cap hit, 59 million cap hit, 61 million dead cap. So, just want to bring that point up because this season will be the season that you are paying the most. The potential out is 2024, 3 years, 126 million, 61.91 dead cap. That's what you will get if you cut Dak Prescott or if you trade Dak Prescott because it goes away. So that's interesting, right? I thought that Dallas didn't. Well, I mean, they did restructure the contract to where this is the year that you could get out in the last year of the contract. Still, you got, $70 million in dead cap. They're not going to do it again because they did it with Tony Romo when Dak actually took over, right? In that preseason when he took over, and they ended up losing a ton of money, and they're still have dead cap issues because of that, literally. And you cannot do that again with Dak. So I just wanted to bring that point up for you, just so you could see the amount of money that Dallas would be losing if they cut him or let him. Well, if they cut him, if they trade him, it's a completely different ballgame because it goes on to the other cap. But if they cut him, that's what happens.
No, but who's going to want to take that salary? I mean, granted, out of all the quarterbacks in the league, 30 million base salary is not too bad for one season. Then you re-sign him, and
It,
hopefully it's a better
yeah.
deal. But like, I don't know. It's really weird.
How many how many teams how many teams in the NFL right now are wishing that they had 3 12-win seasons in a row, 12-5.
I mean, yes, so many.
So many. And largely due to Dak Prescott, right? I think that he not only has a market, he has a hell of a market.
Mm-hmm.
But it's got to be the right team, and that right team who happens to be picking in the top of the first round that's most likely going to get a quarterback because they have the money to, because they're in the top of the first round, because they have the worst team, which means they don't have a ton of money on the roster, has that money to spend. But what am I saying here, right? This all has to happen before the NFL draft, right? You're not going to get a team that's like, oh, I missed out on my quarterback, got to go get Dak Prescott. That doesn't happen, right? You have the Eagles where it's like, oh, crap. We should have got an extra wide receiver. We didn't. Let's go get Julio Jones. It doesn't happen with a quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't happen. So I don't know. To answer your question, I don't know who's going to want him. Are there teams that want him? Hell yeah.
Of course.
Yeah. He's an MVP in the regular season. And I don't know. Maybe if he leaves Dallas, he starts to win playoff games. Who knows? That seems to happen all the time when players leave anyway. But I don't know. We'll see what happens. But I think that Dallas. Do you think Dallas keeps him this year, or do you think they do something crazy and let him go?
It's just hard for me, like rehashing my point. It's just hard for me to you know analyze him based on this season because of what's going to happen with the coaching staff. Because you just can't. It's a transition year with the coaching staff. You can't expect him to go in there and play his best football because he doesn't know the scheme that's coming in. He doesn't know this. Like, obviously, if it's a very similar scheme, then I mean, yeah, sure. But like, we don't know who it's going to be. It could be Vrabel. It could be Harbaugh. It could be Belichick. These are projects. It's not going to happen overnight. Sometimes you see it happen with Houston,
Yeah.
but like, it took a couple years. They got those draft picks. Houston was CJ Stroud was an absolute, top of the board, outstanding 5-star pick, but it's just like, it usually takes time. This is not a usual occurrence where it's like teams change overnight. Whatever coaching staff is going to come in, it's going to take a while for their scheme to click with these players. It's going to take a while for these guys to understand what they need to do in these systems, especially since the defense is going to be overhauled, the offense is going to be overhauled, the head coach is going to be overhauled. It's completely new. It's nothing. These players have never seen this before. So to expect, greatness out of Dak Prescott once again during the regular season, I think is, kind of dumb. It's just like, if you're going to do something with Dak, do it now, because next year doesn't make a whole lot of sense to do it. Why would you not get rid of Dak Prescott? I love Dak, don't get me wrong, but just from a negotiation and just business standpoint, you get rid of him, you bring in your new coaching staff, and your new coaching staff has a shot at whoever they want to be quarterback. And if they completely suck, if the team is terrible, you get a high pick and you get to pick your quarterback for the next year. And it could be someone good, it could be someone bad. But whatever is working right now doesn't seem to be working in the playoffs. And that's what we've evaluated. I think Dak Prescott is 2-5 in the playoffs. You can count the one game he won against Tampa, the one game he won against Seattle. Both were, well, I'll say the Seattle one was a close game, but the one he won against Tampa, he played amazingly in. He also played really well in the Seattle game. The other ones, he didn't. Divisional round against the Rams, I think it was 2018. He played okay, but that was a Zeke game. Against the two Niners games, didn't play great. Against the Packers, didn't play great. And his rookie season against the Packers, played okay. It's just, there's not a whole lot of things, once again, to hang your hat on with his playoff experience. And I think it's one of the worst, if not the worst, record among starting quarterbacks in the NFL for playoffs, for like playoff records. So I think that shows you all you need to know. If you're going to do something, you should do it now, because why would you wait a whole other year just to expect, like the same result? Because like, I just don't see Dak Prescott going in there with a new coaching staff, completely revamped offense and defense, winning a Super Bowl. because it didn't happen with Mike McCarthy's first year. Yes, Dak got hurt, but it's just, it takes time to get used to these things, and they're not going to have time. So why would you evaluate it after the end of next season? I think if Dak Prescott is going to stay, he will stay this year and for the long term. If he's going to leave, he's leaving this year. I don't see him leaving after next year. It could happen, but I just don't think it's a very smart decision because there's not a lot to base it off of. But that's pretty much it. I don't really know. I would love to see a new quarterback in Dallas. I really would. I love Dak, and he's done a lot for this organization, and he's done a lot for this franchise, but just not the things that count. At the end of the day, it's just not the things that matter. He's had a couple great seasons. He won Offensive Rookie of the Year. When he was here, he won Walter Payton Man of the Year. He's won countless offensive awards, broken countless Cowboys records, but it doesn't matter. Who cares? Why? The only thing that matters here is winning in the playoffs, and he hasn't done that.
When the two previous quarterbacks, unfortunately, before Dak, you got a guy over your shoulder on the left with Tony Romo there. He also didn't win in the playoffs, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you really haven't had a quarterback since Troy Aikman in the 90s consistently win in the playoffs. Romo had one of the worst records in the NFL as well. Goes right to Dak. Dak has one of the worst records in the NFL in terms of playoff wins. So, yeah, and Dak's been a Dallas Cowboy for a very long time. This is almost his third contract, and he's once again only 2 playoff wins. And yes, a couple of those seasons, he did not play all of the games, but 2 seasons out of the 9 that he's been here, and you still only have 2 playoff wins. That's not only pathetic, that's just unacceptable. It's especially at an organization that really strives for Super Bowls, right? Dallas is the number 1 sports franchise in the world, not in the United States, in the world, in terms of, popularity, in terms of money spent and everything. So clearly, they've been doing it because Jerry Jones changed the game in the NFL. He did. He completely changed the NFL when he came into it. And fortunately for Dallas, when they didn't have a salary cap, that's when they won all the Super Bowls. And since then, they haven't done it because Jerry can't just go out and pay everybody.
Mm-hmm.
When you go look at the roster of the Dallas Cowboys Super Bowl teams, it's unbelievable. Everyone that beat him in the previous years on other teams, Jerry took them. And you can't do that now. Like Charles Haley, Deion Sanders, like, hey, come over here. Can't beat you. Join us. Right now with Dallas. Hey, I think Cowboy fans there's a divide between who wants Dak Prescott to stay and who wants Dak Prescott to go. Because for me, Dak's been the best quarterback we've had. Right after that is Tony Romo.
Mm-hmm.
And loved both of them, but they both didn't win in the playoffs. So, Dak Prescott and Tony Romo, I don't think have 5 playoff wins between the two of them. And if CJ Stroud goes to the playoffs and wins 1 round for the next 4 years, he has more than both of those guys in 5 years, right? So it's a stat that's shocking.
Mm-hmm.
It's absolutely shocking that he's 2-5 in the playoffs. It's not like he's won the ship before, right? It's not like those 2 games even got him all the way to the Super Bowl, because you can't just win 2 games and get to the bowl, right? You got to win 3.
Yeah.
So he's never even gotten close. He's never even gotten outside of the divisional round. So, that's the biggest thing for me. And yeah, it's hard to argue that he's going to come back next season with a whole new coaching staff, whole new scheme, and continue to be as good as he is. But my counterpoint to that would be, this is a good enough roster that you're going to make the playoffs no matter what if you have Dak Prescott at quarterback and you have Micah Parsons on the defense. Because I don't know. I understand that Micah gets double teamed and triple teamed, but why does Myles Garrett and why does TJ Watt have so much success when they're double teamed and triple teamed every play? Because their defensive coordinator schemes around them.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know why I don't know if Dan Quinn got away from that, or, literally it's pretty known around the league that if you stop Myles Garrett, if you stop TJ Watt, if you stop Micah Parsons, it's the defense is not the same defense. But here's the thing. Myles got stopped in that playoff game.
Yeah,
Myles didn't do anything
Mm-hmm.
in that playoff game against Houston. They schemed him completely out of the game, and that's how they won the game. Same thing with the Cowboys, right? Have you ever seen someone shut down TJ Watt? I don't think so. I don't think I've ever seen anybody shut down TJ Watt, and that's just a testament to what type of player he is.
Mm-hmm.
So Yeah, when you have, the number 3 best defensive end in the league, in my opinion, on your team, and he gets a couple holding calls, I don't know. To me, that's not a very good performance.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? Dak, they got 32 points that they put up, but that wasn't really what it looked like, right? CeeDee Lamb looked horrendous in that first half, and then he got going in the second half. The only consistent player was Tony Pollard, like I said. So we'll see. And, that's not even hitting on the roster, right? That's not even hitting on the roster that Dallas is going to have next season because a lot of contracts are up. One of those contracts is Tony Pollard,
Oh yeah.
right? So that means Dallas has to invest in a running back in free agency or in the draft, which means you're taking away a high draft pick because if you're drafting a number 1 running back, you don't typically wait until the 5th or 6th round to do that. You get him in the first, second, or third, and he steps in and starts. So I think what Dallas needs to do is evaluate Dak Prescott. If there's better options out there and you can somehow, swindle a deal into getting another quarterback out of it, then maybe you do it. Maybe it's a straight up trade, not a straight up, but a trade kind of sort of like Jared Goff and Matthew Stafford. All those two needed was Matthew Stafford was incredible at Detroit forever or for how long he was there, but all they needed was a change of scenery, and you saw what happened with both organizations,
Mhm.
right? So if there's a trade option like that available, I say 100% do that. But if there's not, I don't think they will.
Really?
I think free agent wise, you have a lot of veteran running backs that are sitting there that are
Okay.
going to be ready. And a lot of those running backs are power backs,
Oh yeah.
which is what Dallas needs.
Oh yeah.
So I
What
think
about?
free agent wise, you go out and get it back.
I agree with you on the running back point. We've been harping this for a while. You need a power back. Tony Pollard's just not cutting it. I don't think he's going to be back this next year. You need someone young,
No.
preferably. Um, but you brought up an interesting point. I know we're running on like 2 hours here, but like, if you're still listening, good job. But like, what if what if the Cowboys get an absolute haul? Like, what if the Cowboys get a first round pick, like in this draft? Let's say, like from a top
Yeah.
10 team. They that puts you in a position to draft one of these quarterbacks coming in, one of these guys that could change a franchise, and they get an absolute haul for Dak Prescott. What do you take that deal? Do you take that deal? You take the chance on a new coaching staff and a young rookie quarterback from this draft class, and Dak Prescott is out, and this new guy is in. Do you take that deal for an absolute haul of picks?
I wouldn't personally because I don't think any quarterback outside of Caleb Williams is gonna transform an organization. Drake May, in my opinion, he's fallen off. He not fallen off. He's the consensus number 3 usually, number 2, number 3 pick in this draft, and also number 2, 3 rated prospect. For me, I don't value him that high. I have a I think a late first round grade on him. The only player that I have an early first round grade on is Caleb Williams because I think he's going to come in and transform an organization. I think he's already locked in at number 1 with Chicago, though. So realistically, if you're jumping into the top 10, you're telling me that Drake May is probably not going to be available because he's going to go high at number 2 or number 3. So you are looking at Jaden Daniels, the LSU quarterback, who, how do you evaluate the other 4 years of his tape? If you go look at his other 4 years at ASU, he went for 3 years at ASU and 1 year at LSU. Then he had his season this year. Don't go look at his other 4 seasons because he's not the same quarterback. Michael Penix Jr., his other seasons, every single season, like I said in the previous podcast, he got hurt. How do you value a quarterback that's gotten hurt every single year and has only played 1 season, right? So you've got those guys, and then you've got maybe Bo Nix that can slip in the mix there too. You've got a couple other guys, probably not in the first round. You got JJ McCarthy. That's a freaking Dallas pick if I've ever heard of one.
Mm-hmm.
But I think he's going to be there in the second round. So personally, for me, no. The only player that I would trade for in this draft class, and I think gives you a better chance long term to win, is Caleb Williams. That's it, in my opinion. Now, quarterback is the hardest position to evaluate in the entire draft,
Mm-hmm.
right? They're the hardest position to evaluate. Right under them is wide receiver, in my opinion. Hardest positions to evaluate for me, looking at these guys and watching the tape and scouting these players. I could be wrong. I've been wrong before, right? But me, no. The only player that I am getting rid of Dak Prescott for this season is a straight up quarterback trade, like I talked about. You need a change of scenery, and you got a guy that's as good as Dak Prescott. That's the only way I'm getting rid of him. But does Dak have that value? Does Dak have the value for a team like the Denver Broncos to
I think
go do
so.
a ridiculous trade,
I think so.
right? Deshaun Watson. Deshaun Watson had the value and the Browns did it,
Mhm.
but that was a free agent, right? So it's like there's a lot. There's a lot that could happen, and I think that you and I are going to be talking about this a lot
It's a
week
v
over week.
it's a very strange year upcoming.
It, it it's an extremely strange year, and yeah, you're right. The Dallas Cowboys could have an entire new coaching staff, a new quarterback, and a new halfback at the end of this year. And hell, if they let CeeDee Lamb walk, which I don't think the organization would let him, then a new wide receiver as well. But we've talked at length this episode about the Cowboys. Tanner said it. We're hitting in the 2 hour mark, so we're going to get these matchup preview and picks section done pretty quickly.
I forgot we didn't do this yet. I'll be
Yeah,
honest. We haven't even done
we
this yet.
yeah, we haven't done this yet. We're going to go real quick. This is the NFL divisional round. Last week, Tanner, go ahead and update the listeners on how we both did, and we'll rapid fire these picks through.
We're rapid fire. We were both 4-2, so that brings me to 64-38, which is pretty fun, and Chad 63-39. So once again, pretty close, but Tanner's still taking the edge on this one. First matchup though is Texans and Ravens. Who do you got, Chad?
I'm going Ravens. I think the Ravens are coming off of a bye week. Resting. I think CJ Stroud's good, but I don't think the Texans have faced a defense like the Ravens. I also don't think that they've faced a veteran coaching staff and all these veteran players on this defense like they're going to. So I take the Ravens, and I think that the Texans are going to make it a close game though, and it's just different when you're not at home and you're at Baltimore in the playoffs. But hey, if there's one rookie quarterback that can beat him, it's CJ Stroud. But I'm giving the slight edge to the Ravens on this one.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think Browns were the only ones that can take them down. No, I think that Lamar Jackson's going to be the MVP. This defense is probably the best in the league, and hasn't really been let's say like underestimated or overestimated a lot. Everyone's pretty confident that they're the best in the league, if not one or two, and they've shown it against really good teams. So I'm going to go with Baltimore. I think that this really good defense combined with C.J. Stroud being a rookie is going to give Baltimore the edge, and I think they're going to win by 10. Honestly, I think they'll win by 2 scores, and
Nice.
I think C.J. will be competitive though. I think it's going to go down to the end of the game where something's going to happen. They're going to throw a big play, and you got to throw for wins and stuff like that. But I think Baltimore's gonna edge them out at the end and put up another touchdown on top. So that's who I got.
Nice. Next game on Saturday night, we got the Packers versus the 49ers. I'll start that one off. Packers, great season. 49ers, your pick.
Yeah, it's hard to pick against the 49ers, but it seems like a Niners game. It really does. You look back to the Packers and the Niners when they played, when the Packers were the number 1 seed, and the Niners kind of destroyed them. So, this organization has struggled with this team recently, and I think it's going to continue. Niners defense is just too good. It's just another one of those defenses where you never, they're not bad ever. It's just they're good, and they will be good unless they play the Baltimore Ravens, and they kind of suck. But they will be good. In the NFC because they've shown it. They're the number 1 seed for a reason. So there's just not a lot to threat from the Green Bay Packers. They're just not, no offense to Dallas who got destroyed by them, but they're not, they don't shine in anywhere specifically. Jordan Love, he's playing really well, but we haven't seen him against this kind of team, so it's just, give me the Niners. I think it's pretty easy.
And starting the Sunday games, we're at Saturday, Sunday games, and that's kind of crazy to think about. There's only 8 teams left.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, Sunday afternoon, we got the Bucs versus the Lions, another NFC matchup. Tanner, go ahead and start us off with this one.
I'm going to go the Lions. No, these are my two favorite teams in the NFL right now left, and I'm telling you, man, it's hard to keep the Lions out. They're playing at home, and they got a chip on their shoulder. They seem like they're going to win. They look really good. They're playing their style of football, and I don't think Ciampa's going to come in there and change that. Unless Baker were to throw for 4 or 5 touchdowns, which he has before, but not in a playoff game. So Baker's never made it past the divisional round. I don't think he's going to start now, and that magic is going to come to an end in Tampa Bay. But hey, it was a fun season while it lasted, and Detroit's heading to the NFC Championship game against the Niners.
I also have the Lions in that one. I think that the only point I'll make though about the Lions is the Lions cannot stall like they did in the previous game because the Bucs have a good enough offense and Baker's playing good enough right now that he can actually take over a game, which is crazy to say. But
That's
he
what I'm
has
saying.
Mike Evans, he has Chris Godwin. Do what?
Yeah, he has to have like 4 or 5 touchdowns if they want to win.
100%, 100%. Everything has to go right for the Bucks for
Mhm.
them to win this game. But one thing that they can do is limit the Lions running game, because the Bucks defensive line is one of the best and their linebackers is one of the best. I don't think they're going to be able to match up against the wide receivers and the speed. And if Jared Goff has a decent game, I think that the Lions take this one. But the Bucks definitely have a chance. And I think this one's going to be a little bit closer, because I don't think you've seen the Lions have the ability to close out a game. And when I mean close out a game, I mean like stomp on the other team's throat, right?
Mhm.
What the Lions should have pulled away in that Rams game, but they didn't, right? The Rams just kind of stayed in, and the Rams had a chance to win it, but they didn't at the end, right? I don't think you can continue to do that as you go in the playoffs, because these teams are really good and they know how to win games. And if you give them a drive at the end of the game, specifically the Bucks, I think they're gonna go down and get points, if not score. So I got the Lions, but I think this one's going to be a little bit closer, and I need them to play better than they did last week. The best matchup, I think, every season, pretty much, it seems like this is happening. The Chiefs versus the Bills, but this time we talked about it, the Bills are at home. This is the first time that I will pick the Bills over the Chiefs, so I'm taking the Bills at home. I have already seen Tanner's Super Bowl preview, so I think that he's going to go same. But I can't believe I'm picking against Patrick Mahomes. But if you're going to pick against Patrick Mahomes, this is the year to do it. I don't think I'm going to ever again. So I got the Bills this year.
Yeah, I mean, you pretty much summed it up. I'm going to go with the Bills. This is just Tom Brady, Peyton Manning. Unfortunately for Josh Allen, he's the Peyton Manning. But hey, Peyton did get a Super Bowl at one point. So I think it's going
Got
to
two.
be, he got 2, and Josh is going to get himself 1 too. No, I don't know. But, I think he's going to beat the Chiefs. He played really well in that last matchup, and it's really unfortunate they didn't win, but they're at home. They got James Cook running all over them. They got playoff Lenny too. Don't forget about Leonard Fournette back there too. No, Diggs is playing really well. This team is just hitting its stride when the Kansas City Chiefs look like they're not. But again, it only takes a game for the Chiefs to get back into the Chiefs of old. So if there's any game the Chiefs are going to turn it on, it's going to be this one, because Mahomes doesn't like losing to Josh Allen, and they respect each other. Both of them respect each other so much, but I think Josh Allen's finally going to make this, a competition. They play pretty well against each other. Josh Allen plays pretty well against the Chiefs in the regular season. In the playoffs, it's not the same, but I think we're going to see that change this Sunday night. Sunday Night Football, probably NBC. So it's going to be fun. Don't miss it. It's probably going to be the best game of the playoffs, at least up until this point, and maybe the Super Bowl.
Literally. Folks, thanks for listening for 2 hours. We didn't think it'd go that long, but that's what happens when the Cowboys and the Eagles get eliminated. We'll see
Yeah.
you next week.
Bye.